diversity.
I saw this yesterday,
Frank.
yeah.
This is a terrible but brilliant story, Mike, frankly.
Right.
70-odd years old.
Unbelievable.
She retweeted something around, funny enough, illegal immigrants that commit crimes should be deported. I don't think there's anything wrong with that sentiment.
No, apparently it's not Conservative Party policy.
No, clearly not, which might be why they're in the position they're in.
Indeed. Third.
And in the same vein, a top cop sacked for saying what we all think is true about Just Stop Oil. He said that they're an evil cult and that they all perhaps have got mental illness.
Yeah.
And so he's been sacked for telling the truth.
Yeah, there you go. Sacked for telling the truth. That's what happens. Russell Quirk's here. Plague of the Week tonight. See you next week.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's just gone 10 o'clock. I'm Russell Quirk. This is talkTV, the home of common sense. You just had 4 hours of that with Mike Graham. Another 3 hours coming up with me, I hope. Love you to join us, 0344 499 1000, or indeed you can text 87222 plus the word talk. We'd love to hear from you. This is your channel, after all, the home of free speech, not just common sense. Lots and lots and lots coming up. I'm going to be joined by Candice Holdsworth as my wingman for the 3 hours of the show. Can I say wingman, Candice? Does that insult you?
Not really, no.
Because I think wingman is a kind of phrase rather than it being gender specific, a bit like manhole cover.
Yes, I think people take it too literally, that kind of thing.
I think so. So I'm glad I haven't insulted you in the first few seconds of the show, Candice. So we'll be coming to Candice in a minute to talk about a bit of a news roundup with regard to the politics and news of the morning. Yes, also coming up, of course, we have Labour facing fury last night for launching toothless, small-scale probes into grooming gangs instead of a full national inquiry. So they've buckled a little bit, but not by much. We'll also be talking to a lawyer about this later on to see what the scale, to see what the extent of this decision is. Will it actually have any teeth? I suspect it won't have much in the way of such. Migrants also who refuse to embrace British culture should find somewhere else to live, says Tory leader Kemi Badenoch. What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000. Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party, acting a bit like reform, really. I mean, becoming more reform-like by the day, I think, presumably to stop the hemorrhaging of Conservative support that is going to reform. Do you agree? I do, by the way, and I absolutely think that if you decide to come to this once great, beautiful country of ours, and then you just want to diss it and you want to take advantage of it, well, then you shouldn't be here. You either come here because you like it, and therefore you suck it up in terms of our culture, our laws and so on, or you don't. Also, the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says a deal to release the hostages has been agreed, but of course not everybody is happy about that. We will be talking about that a bit later on. A hastily convened deal, of course. It looks like there's lots of political posturing going on there, bearing in mind what's about to happen in the United States on Monday. Donald Trump certainly having a hand on that, although Joseph Biden, of course, would deny that. And also some breaking news regarding something we are going to be talking about, which is this rapper unmasked by The Sun as the murderer of Jimmy Mizzen, who faces a return to jail after apparently breaching his licence. This is the guy that the BBC decided that it was OK to feature on their channel. So this is Jake Fahri, who's 35, served 14 years in jail up until 2023 for the murder of schoolboy Jimmy. He has been recalled to prison for breaching his licence conditions. Now, we will be talking to Peter Blexley about this. I actually was going to speculate that he might not. I mean, given the climate of our judicial system and the way that the police, the probation service and so on conduct themselves, much to the criticism of presenters and guests on this station, that actually he might have got away with it. And this is the fact that despite only being released for a murder that he only served 14 years for, by the way, so 14 years for a murder. He was released under licence. One of the conditions for that licence was that he should not inhabit the area of Greenwich and associated areas. And he ignored that, it seems, by shooting a rap video with Canary Wharf and the Greenwich Peninsula in the background. So literally sticking two fingers up to his licence, to his release conditions. But it looks like the probation service, for once, actually, have done their job. Congratulations, probation service. You know, you do actually have a purpose that you serve, it seems. He has now, Jake Fahri, has now been recalled to prison for breaching his licence conditions. How long for? Well, we'll try and find out, but we'll be talking to Peter Blexley about that a bit later on. And also, this is mad. I was just talking to Mike Graham about this. Get a load of this. This is the former Conservative minister, Dame Andrea Jenkyns, who of course is now a member of Reform. She's no longer a member of the Conservative Party. She says that the Conservative Party forced her mother to undergo diversity training. Bear in mind her mother was in her 70s at the time. This was back in 2022, I think. Diversity training was forced upon her as a member of the party because she liked a social media post that called for illegal migrants that commit crime in Britain to be deported. Now, what is wrong with that? Again, back to my earlier point just now, if you are an illegal migrant and you commit crime and you are convicted of said crime, you should be deported. You simply should not be here. And let's just kind of think for a second about how many foreign criminals, migrants that are criminals that have been convicted, are in our prison system. It's over 10,000 foreign criminals currently taking up those spaces, 10,000 spaces in British prisons. No wonder we have a prison crisis. So is that controversial? We'll be talking to Andrea Jenkyns later on. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. If you actually think that illegal migrants that then come and commit sexual crime, theft, assault or whatever, burglaries, car crime, if you don't think that they should be deported, I would be delighted to take your call. 0344 499 1000, or you can text 87222 and the word talk. This is Talk, the home of common sense, as I think you can probably tell. And talking of common sense, my good mate Candice Holdsworth, how are you? Glad to see you back in the presenter's friend chair.
It's been such a long time. I love it. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, look, we love you too, because you're full of common sense. So shall we talk about some of this stuff?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this grooming gang probe. Right. So it's taken the Labour government 2 weeks, having humiliated themselves by saying, well, you know, child rape, is that really such a big deal? Do we really need to probe it? Do we really need a proper inquiry with teeth? No, I don't think we do. And because of huge pressure from parliamentarians, particularly Reform, I have to say, and to a lesser extent, I think Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch and so on, and most of the media, although the left elements of the media, of course, have been rather, you know, apologist as ever, but including Elon Musk, who, of course, has waded in, which I welcome, on the basis of freedom of speech. So the government have kind of given in a bit, Candice, but only on a very limited local inquiry basis. What do you make of that?
I think they're so out of step with public opinion and they don't even realise it. There was a really good poll by JL Partners. I mean, they're one of the few polling companies to have predicted the US election correctly. So they're very good. They've got their finger on the pulse. And they have shown comprehensively that the public supports a national inquiry. Yeah. You know, the reason that this caught fire isn't because everyone's jumping on a far-right bandwagon, as they seem to think in the Labour Party. It's because it has real cultural resonance right now. These are the things people are talking about. I can imagine 8 years ago, if Elon Musk had started talking about this, no one would have cared. They would have been like, what's he talking about? But now, at this moment in time, it's massive. And it's not just that, you know, it's Elon Musk and he's this, you know, big political figure with this huge following. It's because it's important to the people of Britain right now.
Well, and some Labour MPs seem to have recognised that. So a couple of broken ranks, including, additionally, Andy Burnham, of course, was an MP, is now the Mayor of Greater Manchester. So 3 or 4 Labour MPs have actually found some principles, it seems, and have said, yeah, we also think that there should be an inquiry into this. And just to be clear, look, the difference between a national inquiry, which would have power, which would have teeth, and a limited local inquiry at council level, it is like this. Let me set it out as I see it. If it's a local inquiry, first of all, it would presumably be overseen by the council itself. The problem with the council overseeing a probe into grooming gang criminality in its own area is that effectively that's the council marking its own homework.
Yes.
So how are we possibly going to get proper scrutiny and outcomes from a council that is looking into itself and its own councillors and its own council officers? That seems to me to be the first problem with this in terms of the first hurdle being knocked over. The second is that because it's potentially a local probe, a local inquiry and investigation, it would mean that they don't have much power. So they can't, for instance, make people give evidence under oath, which a parliamentary, a national probe would do. But also, they won't be able to requisition evidence like a national inquiry would. So what do you make of this in terms of the U-turn? Although it's not quite a U-turn, it's kind of not a 180. It's a kind of 90-degree turn, isn't it? Because it's a partial giving in. But the Labour government, the front bench, Yvette Cooper, Keir Starmer, Jess Phillips, are still scared rigid of a proper probe. Now, we can all speculate as to why that will be, and I'm going to do that, by the way. I would speculate it's because Keir Starmer will be seen as wanting, as the former Director of Public Prosecutions. I think it's because various Labour-controlled councils and councillors have sought to cover this up over decades. Some might say, actually, perhaps some Labour politicians are even more implicated. I will leave that right there. And so, you know, it's clear that the Labour front bench, and the problem for them is it's so obvious that the reason that they are preventing a national inquiry is because they themselves as a collective, as a party, are culpable. As a consequence of that, we all know that they're culpable. So, you know, they've painted themselves into a corner. So, I mean, does it satisfy anyone that this local thing now has been decided upon by Yvette Cooper yesterday?
No, because it will fail to look at everything. All the points you outlined are absolutely right, and I agree with them. But I think as well it will fail to look at things on a systematic level. I mean, we need to know how far this problem goes. And we need, the terms of reference need to be set in a very focused way so that we understand exactly what happened in all these institutions that failed. The police, the social services, you know, people have brought up other things like family breakdown, for instance, in those communities. I mean, a lot of the girls who were targeted were very, very vulnerable, and these gangs knew that. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be looked at, and you're just not going to do that if you're hyper-focused on one local area.
Well, and it's just 5 areas. So,
yes.
you know, it is very clear and very much the case that this rape gang, and that's, again, as we do on this channel, let's talk about this as it is, child rape, not just grooming, because grooming rather kind of glosses over the enormity, the seriousness of what this is. Thousands of young white girls underage, raped by largely Pakistani grooming gangs, right? Let's tell it as it is. But across dozens and dozens of towns and cities across Britain. So the fact that this only probes 5 of those towns is surely inadequate. The fact that the police have said that there are currently, I think, 179 incidents under investigation now across 29 police forces. So, you know, we have to ask the question as to why only 5 have been selected. What about all of the others? Because this is clearly an epidemic, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. I think that it's still going on, and I think it's very interesting, you know, the shift from the very euphemistic term of grooming gangs to rape gangs. People are really sort of getting to grips with this now, and people don't want this language which isn't straight talking, which doesn't look it in the face, and isn't hard-headed. People want this to be solved now.
Let me put it a different way. If you are one of the apologists on the Labour side of the argument, whether you're, you know, an observer or indeed a politician, let me just suggest to you that you look through this through the eyes of you being a parent of one of those 13 or 14-year-old girls. I think you might start to see things slightly differently. Let's move on to migrants and Kemi Badenoch talking very tough. I mean, she does sound very reform-like, doesn't she? When yesterday she said migrants who refuse to embrace British culture should live elsewhere. I mean, it's the old kind of trope, isn't it, that, you know, go back to where you came from. But she's got a point. Why would you want to come to Britain and not like it? Why would you not want to abide by our rules, our culture, our conventions? Why would you not understand that, you know, we can live side by side, different cultures, different races, different religions? Why would you come here thinking that you can change us to your culture and your religion? I think that's what she's getting at.
Yes, I mean, we should have expected a lot more of immigrants before. I mean, obviously, like you say, you don't want to be draconian, you know, you want us all to live nicely side by side. But I can't believe that this is only the conversation we're having now after such huge, large-scale migration. I mean, one of the problems is, and people have said this, you know, it can't be mindless. You've got to think about 2 different cultures, how they are going to adapt to one another. And British culture, there's a reason people want to move here, and there's a reason people want to settle here, because it's a culture that's delivered a great deal of prosperity, high living standards, great innovations, great inventions. That's the reason that so many people want to come here. So you want to preserve that, and to me that's just obvious. But I think that's the reason why we're shifting from saying grooming gangs to rape gangs, because I think that the sort of thinking around it before was incredibly lax and incredibly unstructured, and it's caused massive problems.
But we didn't have this in the 1950s and 60s when people came here from the West Indies, when people came here from Ireland, later when people came here from India. We didn't have this cultural non-integration issue. We didn't have, you know, protests. We didn't have spite. We didn't have this clash of cultures that we seem to have had really over the last 4 or 5 years. And you know, and there's one thing that's changed there, and that is the demographic of those that are coming here.
Yes.
But you know, others that have come here over the last 30 or 40 years that make up the fabric of Britain in a very positive way, in my opinion, have wanted to come here for good reason, have settled, have integrated, and have, you know, provided a contribution to Britain. And as I say, it's fabric and society. That seems to have gone very, very wrong over the last few years. Let me know what you think about this and why, by the way, out there listening and watching this, 0344 499 1000. Do give me a call and let me know. I'll just remind you of that breaking news. Jake Fahri, so he is the individual that was convicted of the murder of Jimmy Misen in 2009, served only 14 years in jail, was let out and decided that he would break his licence conditions by being seen in a rap video recently. But fortunately, unusually, it seems the probation service have immediately acted and have recalled him back to prison. And we're going to be talking about this a bit more with Thomas Godfrey actually after the break, who's a news reporter at The Sun, who has the details of this developing breaking story. So Candice, you're with us for the next couple of hours, 2.5 hours or so. Lots and lots more to talk about, but when we come back after this, I'll be talking to Thomas Godfrey about this Jake Fahri story. Let me know what you think about this, by the way. 0344 499 1000. Why did he only get 14 years, and who on earth does he think he is, coming out early, effectively, and just sticking his fingers up to society and the criminal justice system and breaching his licence conditions? Well, too bad, Jake Fahri. You're back in the nick, mate, as you should be.
Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name. The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, Canada and the United States, that would really be something. All hell will break out in the Middle East, and it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm here till 1 o'clock. I'm ably joined by my friend Candice Holdsworth, who's going to be holding my hand until then, till 1 o'clock. Candice, let's carry on talking about issues of the day, including Suella Braverman being put on the spot with regard to her potentially joining Reform. I think that is... I think there are dots to join there. I mean, obviously she's been slighted, shunned, you could say, by the Conservative Party. She certainly has the right politics, doesn't she, insofar as her being right of centre, even in the Conservative Party, as it's lurched to the left. She was put on the spot asked incessantly by a journalist yesterday whether she would potentially defect to the Reform Party, like Andrea Jenkins, who of course we will have on later, and many other councillors and donors of course have, and Tim Montgomery's of this world, who ironically of course founded Conservative Home. I don't know if he's going to start a new website now called Reform Home. Maybe he should think about that. But she refused to rule out joining Reform. So you would imagine she would say, look, emphatically, no, my home is the Conservative Party. She didn't say that.
No, she didn't. Do you know, the way she was treated within the Conservative Party, once again, I think it's the Conservatives not being in touch with their base and what people are thinking. You know, when she was talking about multiculturalism and how it wasn't working, they didn't like it within the Conservative Party, but I think all the polling showed that the public really agreed with her. She was actually in touch with what people are saying.
Yep.
And, you know, of course, her husband has famously defected over to Reform, and I mean, he said very publicly that he's still furious with the Conservative Party.
Well,
I mean, many people are.
Biding her time. It's a long way from the next general election, I suppose. Let's quickly move over to... I want to talk to Thomas Godfrey, who we've managed to grab from the Sun downstairs, who joins us now to talk about this Jake Fahri story. Thomas, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Talk.
Good morning, Russell.
I know you're part of the family, but it's always good when we get someone like you very, very quickly, based on the breaking news we've just had. So, at last, the probation service have done their job, it seems. He's been recalled.
Well, it seems that way, and we think he'll now have to spend at least another year behind bars, and will have to apply for parole once again. We understand he was arrested yesterday. It comes a couple of days after we first revealed that the identity of this drill rapper 10.
So you broke this, Thomas, didn't you? You broke this story.
We did, yeah. It's part of a team. We first revealed that the rapper 10 was in fact Jake Fahri, the notorious murderer of Jimmy Miz, and obviously that horrible incident in a bakery in May 2008, where Fahri, in a fit of rage, mid-argument, grabbed this Pyrex tray of sausages and used it to slash the gentle giant's throat. By all accounts, a big-hearted boy, and it seems after serving 15 years, a year longer than the minimum sentence handed down at the Old Bailey because of his behaviour in prison, he had to serve a year longer. It seems that time in prison hasn't reformed him at all, and now he is back behind bars today.
But Thomas, let's just so look, good, I'm glad. It's not particularly heartening to hear that he's only going back for another year, so I don't know what the rules are in such a regard, whether there is something in statute that if you get recalled back you do another year, or whether that was part of the original sentencing back in 2009. I don't know if you could elaborate on that in a second, but it's very concerning to hear also, though, that when he was granted licence in 2023 to be released, there were concerns raised about him and his ability to control his anger, yet the probation service decided to release him anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could just read out some of that report in 2023. The board found he'd been unable to cope when he felt he was being disrespected. He had poor problem-solving skills, experienced difficulties with having and keeping a job, and yet despite these mitigating factors that you would think would actually play against him and would make the authorities more wary of releasing him, he was allowed out, having served that minimum term, and clearly hasn't changed a bit. And remarkably, when I spoke to Jimmy's family yesterday, they said that when Jake Fahri was being released, they sat down and decided that they could forgive him to the extent that they hope he would move on. He would start a family, get a job, turn his life around. And it seems now that having failed to do that, Jamie Mizen's family are actually quite happy that this criminal has been put behind bars. And just to return to your point about him having to spend a year now back in prison, that's the length of time before he can apply again for parole. And at that point, the parole board will have to do another assessment. And you'd think after letting him out the first time, they may now take a bit more caution in regard to whether, if he comes out for the second time now from prison, how he'll behave in the future.
Well, I mean, Thomas, I don't hold a lot of hope. I mean, we've had many instances, of course, of the probation service, being quite lenient, shall we say, when it comes to letting people out, like Gary Glitter, for instance, who was, of course, recalled almost immediately because, lo and behold, shock horror, he broke his licence conditions. We've had it with, murderers and big-time criminals, serious criminals, many times. I mean, there has to be serious questions asked there, I think, in terms of the parole board and parole board members that, of course, are made up of professionals and I think lay people as well, why they seem to be so suckered into sob stories and let dangerous people out on the streets only then to re-offend. I mean, it seems to happen more and more and more, doesn't it? Do you think it's because there's pressure on prison places?
Well, I think that might be part of it. Obviously, when he was sentenced, there was less pressure on prison places, and the judge, Mr. Calvert-Smith, at the Old Bailey at the time, took into account the fact Jake Fahri was 19 when he committed these offences. He is now 35.
I mean, so what? He's an adult.
No, I'm not defending him. He is absolutely an adult, but he is now 35, and obviously, he was held in a YOI, Young Offenders Institution, for a long time, got into fights, was a nuisance, disrespected officers, allegedly sexually assaulted a nurse during his sentence. I mean, those are all examples. You would think that when he comes before a parole board, they wouldn't let him out.
And that's right, that happened, and then they made the decision to let him out.
Correct, yeah.
Unbelievable. Questions need to be asked, don't they, surely? I mean, I know we talk about this a lot, and the trouble is, the parole system is completely unaccountable. Yes, we have politicians that oversee justice and so on. Obviously, there's been a bit of a revolving door as such in recent months and years. But there's got to be some accountability here, because these probationary panels, this so-called service, and of course it's not a probation service at all, is it? It doesn't seem to be doing a service to Britain, the public and its population, one little bit, but they are playing fast and loose with people's lives.
When I spoke to Jimmy's mum, Margaret, who's now a campaigner, she's actually in a primary school today spreading a message of peace, hope and forgiveness, and that in itself is, of course, remarkable. But
Brilliant.
She said that it's more than an apology that her family needs. It's easy to apologise and then do absolutely nothing. This now needs a real investigation into how he was released in the first place, but also the root causes of this sort of violence, which ruins just so many lives. And sadly, that number is only going up because of the failure across the country to tackle that problem.
Yeah, indeed. Were the family consulted at all when it came to the probationary process, do you know?
They were told in 2023 he was going to be released.
Not asked for their opinion as to whether... because, the police now, as woke as they are, whenever there's an incident, of course, you immediately get a call asking, as a victim, are you okay? They kind of mop your brow metaphorically. So you would imagine that would extend to the family of a murder victim at least being asked for their opinion, their view on the murderer of their son being let out of prison after 15 years. I mean, that presumably in terms of some hat tip to their emotions, their wishes, that's not something that's granted to the victims' families.
Well, they sat down, when I spoke to them, they said they sat down, they came to the view that if Jake Fahri had been reformed, then he could come out. If he could turn his life around and demonstrate that he would now be an asset and not a burden on the community, then actually he did deserve a second chance. And sadly, he's completely blown that second chance, and not just blown it in a sense that he's failed, but he's actually used Jimmy Mizen's family's good grace and their wishes that he actually reformed and became a better person. He's taken that and blown it straight back in their face. It's incredibly disrespectful to them.
It is. Look, they sound like a very unnecessarily understanding and humble family, frankly, very forgiving in the face of horrendous and I would say unforgiving circumstances. And as you say, yes, he's stuck two fingers up at them, the judicial system and the public. And I suspect, I'm afraid, Thomas, what now happens is in a year's time he goes up for parole again. That is accepted on some weird and wonderful basis, even though no doubt in the next 12 months this individual, Jake Fahri, let's be honest, he will have further fights in prison. He will transgress. He will seek to do other things because he's a bit of a lad and because he's clearly got some issues with authority, this nonsense about people disrespecting me, so therefore I have to put a glass in their face. I mean, people like this shouldn't ever come out of prison, should they?
Well, I think there's a strong argument for that. The length of time that he was sentenced for clearly was not enough for him to reform himself in the justice system, and it is the only option now that he goes back in. And I mean, I'm personally very glad that after our campaign, after our investigation, that the Ministry of Justice and the police have very quickly arrested him and put him back in jail today. Yeah,
well, look, Thomas Godfrey at The Sun, fantastic work on exposing this and obviously for scooping it. Keep doing what you do and hopefully you'll keep following this and maybe putting some pressure on us, I'm sure you will, at The Sun to ensure that perhaps the hopeless, woeful probationary panels that seem to convene and let these people out of prison way before they should do. Hopefully the pressure that the Sun can bring to bear will actually make the probation service and those panels think twice before releasing people like Jake Fahri on an unsuspecting public. Thomas, thanks very much indeed for joining us on Talk. I'm Russell Quirk. Be back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Okay, thanks for joining me. It's Russell Quirk. I'm here till 1 o'clock. Let me know what you think of what we're talking about this morning. 0344 499 1000. Kemi Badenoch saying that if you don't like it here and you don't integrate into British culture, then you should go and find somewhere else to live. Do you agree? 0344 499 1000. Let me know. You can leave a voice note, actually, if you want, again, via WhatsApp, 0344 499 1000 still, and then just leave a message. Let me know what you think also about what we've just been talking about with The Sun, that, of course, broke this story as to who this drill rapper, whatever that is. Turns out he is someone that killed Jimmy Misen 14 or 15 years ago, went to prison, been let out, and almost immediately broken his licence conditions. Do you think he should have got longer? Do you think now that he's been recalled to prison, as we've just heard over the last few minutes, and just the detail imparted to us by Thomas there from our friends at The Sun, do you think he should maybe not be there forever, but certainly not be released under probationary circumstances when he's up for probation in 12 months' time, if he continues to cause trouble in prison, which clearly he has? An alleged potential sexual assault on a nurse, lots and lots of fighting, causing trouble because he felt disrespected. Absolutely outrageous. What a load of old nonsense. Let me know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Talking of nonsense, let's talk about this partial U-turn now properly, with regards to Yvette Cooper's announcement yesterday that she and the Labour government will allow us, how nice of them, a limited local probe into child rape gangs, grooming, the grooming gangs. It will be pretty toothless by the looks of it. It won't have the ability to go very far. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, in a bit more detail now with Peter Garsden, who is a solicitor, so he knows his stuff from a legal perspective. So we'll talk about some of that. And he's also the president of the Association of Child Abuse Lawyers. Peter, thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
What do you make of this? I mean, maybe not the politics of it, but the extent to which what I would call a limited local investigation undertaken by only 5 councils, despite the fact that almost the whole of Britain seems to have been affected by this over decades. What do you make of the ability for what Yvette Cooper has authorised to actually get to the bottom of this problem and to prevent it happening again in the future?
Well, there are several very important points, some of which have been already made in other media outlets. Firstly, if there is a local inquiry, there is no power on the part of the leader to compel disclosure of documents. There is no power to compel the attendance of witnesses. There will be no representation at all for anybody who gives evidence to the inquiry. They'll be without independent support. The report doesn't necessarily have to be published. It does, and the evidence doesn't have to be given in public. So it is a toothless process. Interestingly, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, when that was in its gestation period, initially the Home Office wanted that as a non-statutory inquiry, and there was a lot of complaint about it. The dismissal of several chairmen. Eventually, the government agreed to hold a statutory inquiry under the Inquiries Act of 2005. I can understand the government asking for a local inquiry if it is a purely local matter, but this is clearly
a national epidemic.
Yes,
it is a national epidemic of rape.
Indeed, some very serious allegations, a number of prosecutions and failed prosecutions, a number of failed investigations. There is alleged culpability on the behalf of local authorities and the police. And it's the sort of thing where there needs to be some sort of compulsion. Otherwise, the evidence is not going to come out. And
so, Peter, what I'm gleaning here, and look, I am saying this tongue in cheek because I think this is pathetic on the part of Yvette Cooper. This partial U-turn to somehow appease other politicians, the public, and the media. But in that partial U-turn, so what we're saying is that it's the councils that are going to be investigating themselves, therefore marking their own homework. It only probes 5 areas, even though there are, I think, 29 different police forces currently in the spotlight over this, either historically or in terms of there being current allegations of child rape being investigated. There will be no compulsion to requisition evidence, no compulsion to have witnesses, no one will be under oath, there'll be no support and no transparency. But apart from that, it's a great idea.
Yes.
I mean,
nice
seriously. I mean, I'm sorry to kind of be sarcastic about it, but I don't know any other way to treat this rather than the way it deserves to be treated. This is pathetic, lightweight, tinkering, window dressing.
Absolutely. You only have to look at the attitude of Oldham Council, because this all started, if you remember, because Oldham Council asked for an independent inquiry because I think it was some councillors were alleging that other councillors were engaging in a cover-up exercise. So they wanted external manipulation or assistance from the Home Office, and they never got it. And the same will be the case in many other councils where, you know, obvious signs of sexual exploitation have been overlooked. The police haven't investigated properly, allegations of corruption, etc. So it calls out for a statutory inquiry. I can only say that too loudly.
Let me ask you a very tough question, one that I might get told off for. Do you think that there is a possibility that there are councillors and council officers that will be implicated as child rapists?
Nothing would ever surprise me. I've been doing this type of work now for 30 years. I've seen countless examples in various different institutions where a blind eye has been turned, abuse has been complained of but not investigated properly. I know that I've seen a list of councillors who've been prosecuted for child sexual offences.
And how big is that list? I mean, if they've been prosecuted, it's fine to name them, by the way, but if they've been convicted, but how big is that list? How many people are on that list of convicted councillors that have raped children?
The list I saw ran to about 50, 60.
50, sorry, hang on, Peter. 50 or 60 councillors? I mean, of all parties or just one?
Of all parties.
Of all parties. So 50 or 60 councillors that have been not just had allegations thrown at them, but have been convicted of raping underage girls. Seriously?
Yeah, yes.
And where does that list come from? Because look, I should qualify here that obviously I haven't seen the list, we haven't seen the list, we don't know where that list is from, but just explain exactly the substance of where that list emanates from.
I wish I could tell you. I don't know who compiled it. It's a list of, it's not a list of allegations, it's a list of...
convictions?
Convictions, yes.
So it's in the public domain, it's factual. I'm aghast. Peter, just wait there for a second. My colleague here, my friend Candice Holdsworth, is busting to ask something, I think, or to make a point.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, you know, some who will say that we don't need an inquiry. We've had loads of inquiries up until now. We just need to implement the findings of those. What would you say in response to that? You know, why do we need a new inquiry? Why have those other inquiries kind of been a bit less satisfactory?
Sorry, you're asking me, sorry.
Yeah.
The other inquiries, I mean, let's just deal with the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. That dealt with a limited part of child sexual exploitation. It didn't cover all of it because there were 13 modules in the independent inquiry and child sexual exploitation was just one of them. So it didn't go into enough depth, though it did cover it. That's the last time it was looked at. As far as the other local inquiries are concerned, there are allegations that some of the police officers didn't attend, refused to cooperate. The Manchester inquiry, for example, was limited in duration, I think from 2011 to 2014. So one needs to have another look at this with proper compulsion and a national inquiry to look at this problem generically, nationally, rather than locally.
And Peter, just to ask a kind of follow-up question in terms of the local inquiries that have now been sanctioned pathetically by Yvette Cooper, will they just probe the incidents themselves, the actual rapes, and it seems from what I've read, allow investigations to be restarted if they were kind of inadequate? Will this also go as far as investigating the cover-up itself? Because there are two issues here. One is, of course, the atrocities, the criminality of mass child rape. The other, of course, is how this was covered up. So do these local probes go that far?
I honestly can't answer that question. The local inquiry is very much within the remit of the leader of the inquiry. The Telford inquiry, for example, was led by a KC, and it's up to him to decide what issues should be investigated.
What the terms of reference? Well, I would suggest that there are two specific elements here. One is, of course, the criminality and bringing people to justice that have orchestrated the rape of our children, but also that those that sought to cover it up, whether they be counsellors, council officers, people in the police force or whoever, are also investigated, evidence gathered, brought to justice and imprisoned, because they are almost as bad. They're certainly enablers insofar as allowing this series of atrocities, this epidemic of child rape, to carry on for years and years and years. Peter Garsden, look, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you for your wisdom and your insight. We'll speak to you again soon, no doubt. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm still with Candice Holdsworth. Look, not a nice subject, but of course we have to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, if we brush it under the carpet, well, I would suggest that's exactly why this has been festering now for decades, because our politicians, police services and so on have indeed brushed it under the carpet and covered it up, seemingly for fear of upsetting cultural integration and inciting community issues and problems. Well, I think child rape is a little bit more important than that, and we will keep talking about it. I'm Russell Quirk, back after this.
happy Joe Biden proved to everyone that he has what it takes to be president. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Kamala Harris, L-Y-I-N apostrophe. Take a look at what happened. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's 10 minutes to 11. I'm Russell Quirk, and I'm here till 1 o'clock talking about the issues and the stories of the day with lots of opinion and common sense, hopefully. And hopefully you're enjoying it. Do get involved. You can call us on 0344 499 1000, or indeed you can text us 87222 plus the word talk, or you can leave a voice note, which Mohammed has done actually with regard to what we were saying just now about Kemi Badenoch's comments yesterday, where she said if you refuse to embrace British culture, then you should go and live somewhere else. What do you think about that? This is what Mohammed thinks.
I came to Britain from Iran. I have since changed my religion. I didn't come here for economy or whatever. So because of that, I 100% agree with Kemi Badenoch, because I came here to live like a British person. If I wanted to live like an Islamic person or Iranian person, there is a perfectly functioning country called Iran. I could have lived there. If somebody doesn't like our way of life, it just shouldn't be here. I didn't like my way of life in Iran, so I came here. Thank you very much.
So how can you argue with the wise words of Mohammed there? So he says, I didn't want to be there. I want to be in your country, living as a Brit, which he is, by the way. And if I wanted to live under Islamic rule and Sharia law, and perhaps wanted to see women that were accused of adultery stoned, women not allowed to drive, not allowed to go out, and so on, he would have stayed in Iran or a similar place. It does make you wonder why people decide to come here and then don't seem to like the regime, the laws, the culture, the people even, that they encounter once they're here. You would imagine that they would do a bit of homework, Candice, wouldn't you? I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise getting off the plane at Heathrow, or indeed a small boat at Dover, and thinking, oh my goodness, I've turned up in Britain. I had no idea it was a Christian country with a royal family and libertarian values.
Yes.
I mean, why is it a surprise?
It shouldn't be a surprise, but I think, you know, the women's rights campaigner, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she sort of calls a lot of immigration policy quite mindless. You know, people come in and we don't ask them about why are you here, what are your expectations.
Well, we should ask them 10 questions, and if they get less than 8 of them right, just not let them be here.
Yes, because as people say, this is a home. You know, I mean, Mohammed made such a good point. He said, I didn't just come here for the economy. You know, it's not purely transactional for me. It's the way of life. That's what I was drawn to, and that's what I wanted to integrate into. Yeah. And that is so key. That gets to the heart of it.
Well, I'm talking about the British way of life. So do you remember, cast your mind back, and I know you have an accent, Candice, but you are a Brit, right?
Yeah, so I spent 11 years abroad,
right.
Yeah.
So you remember kind of British values. We used to have them, I think, a few years ago, which also extended to what I think we used to call freedom of speech, yes, where you actually were allowed to say what you want and have an opinion. But it seems that if you're a certain police inspector at Merseyside Police by the name of Ross Meredith, when you speak your mind, and indeed I would argue the truth about such people as annoying, irritating, juvenile Just Stop Oil protesters and supporters, when you say what you think, and indeed what most people in this country think, as a matter of freedom of speech, on social media and elsewhere, you get fired. And that's exactly what's happened to Ross Meredith. So police inspector at Merseyside Police has been a police officer for many, many years. He made some comments. Let me just read some of them. He said in July 2022 that a particular Just Stop Oil protester was suffering from a mental health condition. Ross, I think you've got a point. He also said in May the following year, so 2023, that he said the organisation itself acted like spoilt special needs kids. Now that's salty language, and you can, I guess, argue with the language itself if you want, but the point he's making is that the so-called protesters, these supporters of this nonsense cult-like behaviour, are acting like spoilt kids that perhaps need some support, shall we say. I think he's got a point. 2 months later, the same officer, Ross Meredith, said that Just Stop Oil is an evil cult. I don't know many people that would argue that he's wrong. Yet, actually, what Merseyside Police then decided to do was to say, look, the posts on social media, but presumably he posted them actually as a citizen, as a member of the public, rather than as a police officer from the police account, one would imagine. But they said that the officer's comments demonstrated a lack of respect and courtesy for those with disabilities. No, they don't. He wasn't having a go at people with disabilities. He was saying that people that protest glue themselves to roads and sit there on gantries above the M25 and throw soup over works of art, that they have got mental health issues. They obviously have. Ross Meredith is right. But they go on to say that he also showed a lack of impartiality in dealing with groups of people who have strong legitimate views around the important issue of climate control. Now, I don't think that the hearing chairman that actually oversaw the disciplinary here is Assistant Chief Constable Alex Goss. I don't think they have any place talking about whether climate change is important or not. That is not within the police service's remit to decide for themselves that they have perhaps, as officers, a personal agenda when it comes to also being somewhat climate extreme, and to use that potential, I mean, I would say here, that personal view to then impact on the decision they make with regard to the disciplinary outcome when it comes to officers like Ross Meredith. So I don't think he said anything wrong. They say, I go on, the comments were discriminatory and had the potential to bring the police service into disrepute and to undermine public confidence in both Merseyside Police and policing nationally. Mr Meredith was dismissed without notice. His process, by the way, the disciplinary process, was fast-tracked. You remember that word from the summer and the riots when protesters were all labelled as far-right thugs and were all fast-tracked through the judicial system? There's a trend, isn't there, Candice, emerging here? And they've now not only sacked him, but they've barred him from being in the police force for the next 5 years. I think this is absolutely despicable on the part of Merseyside Police. Why should this individual not have an opinion? I also don't think he said anything that 90% of the public, particularly if they're caught up in a traffic jam on the M25 as a consequence of these idiots, I don't think he's saying anything that most of us don't believe, is he?
Yes, I think, look, if you're going to be a serving police officer and speak publicly, just be, less inflammatory in your language. But what we do know is that he wasn't purposely setting out to discriminate against anyone. He's just voicing his frustration. And you're right, it mirrors the frustration that I think the general public have. It's very interesting that these are the sorts of views that they will say that people can legitimately have, Just Stop Oil, climate change beliefs. Those are the sort of fashionable beliefs, the acceptable beliefs to have. But if we look back, if you were gender critical, for instance, you could get visited by the police for a non-crime hate incident, and that wasn't considered legitimate, even though it absolutely was. And, we had people like Harry Miller from We Are Fair Cop, who actually had to fight to say, no, this is a recognised belief. So, there is a lot of that, But
it's the same as the grooming gangs, Candice. We weren't allowed to talk about it,
yes,
and it wasn't allowed to be investigated,
yes,
even though it was a national epidemic of child rape, because it might upset certain parts of the community and certain ethnicities. This is the same thing. Why is it that these organisations, whether it be councils, government, or indeed NHS, civil service, or the police, Why are they so scared of people not just speaking out, but actually telling the truth?
Yes, it's horrible. It's like this sort of this hold, this dogma takes hold over everyone, and there's this culture of fear. And I think it's because, like you say, we've sort of lost that culture of free speech and robust debate. I mean, you know, any time the grooming gangs, up until now, I would think, sort of came up in discussion, people would try and police it. You know, they would say that it's getting too inflammatory, they try and dampen it down. Now they can't do that.
Yeah.
They can't do that. And they shouldn't do that, because the more sort of, in my experience, the more vociferous the debate is, the more you solve.
We've got to raise it, we've got to talk about it, we've got to debate it. Yes, indeed. So if we don't talk about it and debate it, we don't solve anything. A couple of messages just before we go to the top of the hour for the news. Morning, Russell. It's about time the government made decisions themselves instead of leaving it down to quangos and then putting up their hands saying nothing to do with me. And somebody else here says, Jay, the difference between then and now is that immigrants used to want acceptance and it wasn't always forthcoming. We've become more and more welcoming and been met with a two-fingered response. I'm Russell Quirk, back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, here till 1 o'clock. I'm joined by Candice Holdsworth, who's my wing man, but I say that as a phrase rather than dissing her in terms of some gender things. So before, but I don't think you're not going to be particularly concerned, are you, listening or watching this, where I call her wing man or wing person or wing woman? In fact, you'd probably get more animated if I did call her wing person or wing woman. You're a wing man, right? Because that's exactly what the phrase is. Like manhole covers. Right? We're not going to change that, are we, to person hole covers, please. We haven't quite gone that mad yet, although knowing this government, who knows, they might mandate that the word man is hereby replaced by words like person, them, they. Anyway, someone that will have none of this nonsense, I can assure you, is my next guest, who I go way back with, I have to say, and that's Annunziata Rees Mog. And Anjiata, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Hi, Russell. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. So the story is you and I were the two panellists that launched the first plank of the week, which was created by Chuck Thomas and Mike Graham here, of course. Now a 5-year institution, gets something like 250,000 people watching it on YouTube every week. But you and I were the first panellists.
And I think it was almost 5 years ago today, literally, that we did that. And
did it pop up on your Facebook?
Went on to be an amazing show. Well done to Mike for getting it there.
It's fabulous, and I miss you because you've not been on it for a little while. So I do hope you. I know you're miles away now, aren't you? So perhaps not particularly practical.
I do come down to London, so do ask me back anytime. It's so great show.
Love to. Right, let's talk about some issues of the day. Now, of course, you were a former Brexit Party MEP, so you are of the centre-right. You're also related to somebody, I think, aren't you? I just can't think who it is. Who's your brother?
I've got some brother called Jacob.
Yes. So people might say, yeah, but look, she's got form here. But look, so what? I think, look, we'll have maybe not so much a debate, but a conversation now, starting off with this comment by Kemi Badenoch yesterday, where she said, look, if you don't like Britain, if you don't want to integrate with our culture, if you don't want to embrace Britishness, you shouldn't live here. How can she not be right to say that?
I don't see how she can be wrong. That there's a very, very old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans. But I can't begin to think why you would want to move to a country where you dislike their culture and want to live completely counter to it. That doesn't make for a good life for the immigrants, and it doesn't make for a good life for the British people who want to continue with our usual culture.
Yes, I mean, I have no idea why someone would come here expecting to change our culture to theirs. We can have the debate, I guess, about multiculturalism and whether it's worked or not. It would seem that of late, perhaps up to 10 or 15 years ago, it did, but now it is not, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider going to live in, I don't know, Finland if I didn't expect to live like a Finnish person.
I wouldn't want to go to Finland because the complete lack of daylight is deeply depressing, and personally I don't like it.
Or lots and lots of daylight, too much in the summer, yes, indeed. But the point is,
I wouldn't want to go to Saudi Arabia and be told I couldn't drive, and then want to get behind a car and drive round.
Yes.
I would expect to be arrested. I would expect to be in trouble. I can't. That law may have by now changed. If it has, it's very recent. But you get the point that I wouldn't want to go to a country where, as a woman, I had to wear hijab and then strip off. I would expect to be arrested.
So you wouldn't expect to rock up to Jeddah and tell them that you're a Christian and that you were going to live by British values in their country. But it seems to work the other way around, that there is appeasement, I think would probably be the word, when it comes to people coming here expecting Britishness to be diluted.
Well, I think multiculturalism started off, and Trevor Phillips was very, very interesting on this, as an idea that communities integrate, we all live alongside each other, respecting each other's differences, but celebrating our similarities. I think that has developed into having completely separate communities living alongside each other, that there are people who have been here decades who've never learnt English properly, who can't communicate with their neighbours or the local shopkeepers.
Do you think they should be made to?
Or the wider society. And I think that is a real problem because it closes off societies, and what we need to do is have a very open society. It's what our country is all about, that we know our friends and neighbours, that we do communicate, and that we can be part of the same institutions that fundamentally underpin what this country is about.
Yes, but do you think they should be made to? Do you think there should be a test? So in order to grant citizenship or residency, there should be a test including the ability to speak English?
Well, I've actually got an American friend who had a hilarious situation whereby she had a degree in English from one of the American state universities. She had to get a letter from the head of, she also had a degree, a master's from a London university, but she had to get a letter from her head of studies in the English department stating that in America, her English degree included the ability to fluently speak English. Well, of course she could. Her entire degree had been in the English language, and yet she had to prove it. So why don't other cultures?
Well, but this is why cultural integration hasn't worked. If we end up with people coming here and kind of living as they were elsewhere in kind of siloed areas, and that's part of the problem. But with Kemi Badenoch saying this, I mean, it's quite it's maybe an attempt to out-reform reform, really, in terms of, you know, being seen to be choosing language which is you know, red meat type language on Kemi Badenoch's part. Let me just read exactly what she said. She said, "Our country is our home. It is not a hotel. If people arriving here don't want to integrate into British culture, then they shouldn't be here, and it is not controversial to say that." Well, I don't think that's controversial, Annunziata, but some, of course, now, and I'm sure have already on social media, will now label Kemi Badenoch as a racist.
Some people will label anyone as anything, and I think we've got to return to both freedom of speech and respect for other people's views, and that it's not a bad thing to say that people should get on with the people they live with. Of course we all should. And if you don't want to be here, if you want to undermine our culture, don't be here. Yeah. Go back to wherever it is you have come from, where the culture suits what you want.
Well, I don't know if you heard earlier, we had a voice note from Mohammed who said that he came here from Iran because he didn't want to be under the Iranian regime and he didn't want to live, you know, by way of the restrictions of Islam, basically is what he was saying, in his opinion. But that he came here fully expecting Britishness and to embrace Britishness, and he said, if I want to live in a different way, then I know that I'm free to go back to Iran. But yes, he certainly didn't seem to want to do that. So, you know, that is a very commonsensical position to take, isn't it, as an immigrant?
The vast majority of immigrants are in the same category as him. That I know dozens of people born in other countries across all continents who have come here and absolutely embraced how the British run their lives, run their society, run their communities. And they fit in brilliantly and get on with everyone. That is what we can all agree is the best way forward without division in our society.
Yeah, let's just going to ask Candice if she wants to jump in here, because she keeps putting her hand up like she's at the back of the class at school, jumping up and down. I think she wants to ask you something, if we may.
There's been such a shift in mood in the way that we're talking about immigration. I mean, everyone is this word, integration, and I think it's good. You know, we're sort of like finding a philosophical basis for what we want to do. What would you say we do specifically, though, in terms of policies? You know, how can we sort of determine that, you know, whether someone will integrate well, or things that we can put in place to make sure that they do?
Well, I mean, I think we've got this citizenship test as a starting point, but you have to have been here years before you even get to that point. But that test is ridiculous. I remember another American asking me how old the Giant's Causeway was. Well, have either of you got any idea?
Wow.
I mean, how old's a bunch of stones? I have no idea. And I don't care. That's not the core of Britishness, and I think that's what we should be getting to in any tests that we do on people who want to come here.
Do you think we need to understand?
Do you want to celebrate our culture? Do you want to be part of our culture? Do you want to join our communities?
But do you think, therefore, we need to actually understand and define what Britishness is, therefore? Because it doesn't sound like, yes, knowing the age of the Giant's Causeway is much of a qualification with regard to integrating into British life, does it?
No, and I would be surprised if any school child in the country knew it unless they'd learnt it last week in geography. But Britishness is not a definite thing, just as we don't have a written constitution, nor is our culture, and it is always evolving. But committing to being part of what you find is hugely important. And one of the very, very obvious ones is language, that being able to communicate and therefore not closing yourself off to a different community has to be part of it.
Yeah. Let's just talk quickly about Suella Braverman. So she is in the news for something that she hasn't managed to say, and that is that when confronted yesterday and probed with regard to whether she would potentially defect to Reform, which of course her husband has, Rael Braverman. He's now a member of the Reform Party, albeit not a politician. Suella Braverman refused to rule it out. What do you make of that?
Oh, I think she's done so before. I think she believes in centre-right values. and wants, for the best of the country, them to be delivered, however that is done. I think she did state clearly that she was a Conservative MP. She had a long history with them. Whether she decides to change, I think, will entirely depend on who she thinks might win and have the chance to enact the policies she believes in.
She's had quite a patchy relationship, though, I think, with the Conservatives. Obviously, failed leadership bid and so on, criticised for not being a particularly adept Home Secretary, although I have some sympathy for her, frankly, in terms of her being blocked by Cabinet and indeed the Prime Minister of the day, Rishi Sunak, in terms of some of the things that she wanted to enact on immigration. But normally that frustration emanates, as it has done with the likes of Andrea Jenkins and Tim Montgomery and so on, where they defect, not necessarily out of spite, but out of frustration. I mean, you may have a similar view, Annunziata, that your head is turning towards reform, perhaps.
It's not. I did defect. I was a Conservative from 1984 until 2019, so quite a long stint. And I did leave the Conservatives when Theresa May was in power, because I felt she was so betraying the Brexit vote.
She was the first Liberal Democrat MP Prime Minister that we've ever had.
I think there's some competition in there. But I think there have been other very left-wing Conservatives who have undermined the entire Conservative cause, and that's done a huge amount of damage. And until that rot is cut out, I can completely understand why people such as Suella consider going over to a different party. I don't think reform has the answers. I don't think it is the answer to making sure we get rid of this socialist government and undo the immense damage they are doing. I don't think the understanding of the policies is detailed enough. I don't think they have the infrastructure, the backbone, the intellectual support to unpick this incredible mess Labour is dragging us into.
You don't think they're ready?
But the Tories have to unpick some of what they did too. The tax rises are
the Tories simply need to take, I would argue, several leaves out of the reform book in terms of just becoming Conservatives again. I mean, I don't think this is that difficult. Now, I know there are people within the Conservative Party, which obviously you're now a member of again. It's not that difficult to think, well, look, to go back to Conservative values around such things as lower tax, pro-business, being genuinely tough in terms of action on immigration, being tough on crime, thinking about net zero in a different way. Now, I would rip the whole thing up, frankly, but I understand that there are some people within the Conservative Party, both politicians and membership, that are also kind of fixated by this net zero quest, but that needs to be dialed down, in my opinion. But until the Conservative Party understand that they have lurched to the left and reform is simply filling that void, that vacuum. I mean, bearing in mind they are now ahead of the Conservatives' reform in the latest polls. Now, I don't hold out much hope for your party, the Conservative Party, until the Conservative Party become Conservatives again.
I completely agree with you, and I work for an organisation called Popular Conservatism, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to get rid of the quangos that are ruling our lives and preventing our politicians from enacting democracy. We want to rein back the state so that tax can also be lowered, but that the state doesn't run our lives and we're not nannied in this ridiculous way. We want to withdraw from international agreements that hamstring our politicians so that they can't do what voters want. There would be some very low-lying fruit that Kemi Badenoch could go for, get rid of the ECHR, for example.
But that all sounds like reform, Annunziata.
The problem with reform is that they actually also have a lot of very statist policies, and I think that is a real concern. They don't have policies to hand powers back to the public. It's quite controlling, and actually I think we need to have a very open form of government where the people are in charge, and that is hugely important. The freedom of the British people is what matters. That's why we need strong defence, that's why we need strong policing, and that's why we need a small government.
But back to your point earlier about Suella Braverman kind of waiting, that doesn't fill me with much in the way of hope for the integrity of our politicians. Now, I know many would argue that none of our politicians, with your brother accepted, of course, have any integrity. But the fact that there may be politicians on the centre-right sitting there waiting to see what happens in terms of which party they stand for or back, that doesn't smack of integrity, does it?
Well, I think that the Conservatives have a long way to go to earn back trust, not just of the likes of Suella, to fully embrace the party, but for the voters, and that is absolutely crucial. And Kemi has stated clearly that she wants to play a longer game, that her policies will come out in a year or 2 years' time. I think she does. She started yesterday setting out very clear principles. That was an encouraging step, but I think she's got to do a lot more of that.
Well, she's got to do a lot more in terms of opening up about policy.
Something to understand what it is that Kemi's Conservatives stand for.
Yeah. OK, well, look, Annunziata, we need to leave it there, I'm afraid, so we must move on. Annunziata Rees-Mogg, Head of Communications for Popular Conservatism and a former MEP, thank you and for your contribution. Until next time, we're going to take a break and then we're going to take your calls and your messages. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm here till 1 o'clock. Back after this.
It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on fire right now. Literally, the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom or Karen Bass tonight?
Spend less on hair gel. What can I say to them? Not big admirer of either.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's just gone 20 past 11. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm here till 1 o'clock, then handing over to Ian Collins. Thanks for your participation this morning and into the afternoon. Do let me know what your thoughts and comments and opinions are. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We're going to go to a couple of calls in a second. We've also had a load of text messages, so thank you for those. One that's just come in that relates to my conversation with Annunziata Rees-Mogg. That's got to be the best name in politics, isn't it? Annunziata Rees-Mogg. Fantastic. The text is from Caroline, who says, Annunziata is so correct. Cut out the left-wing rot, go back to conservative values and Tories could win again, but I have doubts in trusting them until they can prove themselves, as the last 14 years has revealed them, as left-wing people. Yes, it's exactly what we were saying. Look, funnily enough, we want the Conservatives, and Conservatives want the Conservatives to be conservative. That shouldn't be too much of a tall order. The problem is, of course, that the Conservative Party, in a quest to get elected, which of course with reform nibbling at their heels in the polls is going to be increasingly difficult over the next 3 or 4 years. The problem for Kemi Badenoch and others is to convince us that they are proper Conservatives again. Now, Kemi Badenoch is talking tough. As we've said over the last hour and a half or so, you know, she's set out what her opinion is of people that come to this country and don't want to integrate, don't want to embrace our culture. And that is definitely a Conservative-like statement. But where is she on, for instance, withdrawing from the European Convention of Human Rights, unhinging that, if you like, from the Human Rights Act? Where is she on tax? Where is she on wokeism and gender ideology and so on? Where is she on business? Where is she on net zero? We don't know. We don't know what she stands for. And the problem is, we all know that Conservatives and Labour and Lib Dems, all politicians of all flavours, they talk out of both sides of their mouth. And what I mean by that is that they will say something that they don't necessarily believe in order for it to be popular. They will even, believe it or not, say things just to get elected, which is pretty much what the Labour Party did in the run-up to the election on July the 4th. Say whatever you need to, and even if it means saying different things to different people, just so that you take power. And this is the problem for the Conservatives, I think, that we don't trust them. We don't trust them because they let us down. You know, any Conservative voter will agree with me, most of you, that when your Conservative Party lurches to the left and starts increasing taxes and being obsessed with net zero and not building prison places, not being tough on crime and so on, and importantly, to many of you that watch this channel, the fact that for successive governments we have simply opened the gates to this country for all and sundry, legal and in particularly illegal immigration. We've talked tough on it and we've done absolutely nothing about it. It's going to take more than Kemi Badenoch saying, I'm going to solve the problem of illegal immigration, I'm afraid. So a bit of a long-winded analysis there based on Caroline's text, but yes, you as Conservative voters do want to start trusting them again. I'm not sure you can do that just with words, frankly, from Kemi and her top team. We also have here, Ian says, I don't think Kemi Badenoch could say what she is saying if she was white. And that is at the heart of our country's issues. Actually, I think Ian has a point, Candice, there, don't you? Can she get away with more because she's an ethnic minority?
Well, people have been saying this, but I disagree with that. And I think if that's the case, I mean, we have to blow right through that. You know, we can't start affirming identity politics. I mean, you know, everything you've been saying is so right. You need a firm intellectual basis for why you're doing what you're doing. That's what Margaret Thatcher had when she came into power. She had a very clear purpose, but she had a problem to solve, because you can have an ideology, but it doesn't apply to the times. And I think that's what Labour are facing now. They have a set of ideas, but what problems are they solving? It's not clear. Yeah. You've got to have those two things matched together and matched together very well.
And one problem that definitely hasn't been solved and still won't be, despite Yvette Cooper's announcement in the Commons yesterday that there's going to be a very lightweight, a very lean probe into the child rape gangs that we have had to contend with for decades and decades. That certainly isn't being solved and won't be by Yvette Cooper, it seems. We have a call on that very subject from Stephen in Bury. Are you a Stephen or a Steve, Stephen?
A Stephen, because Steve. I just don't have a V in my name, that's all.
OK. Steve, well, look, thanks for calling Talk. You've got an opinion on that, I think.
Yeah, what Yvette Cooper's doing is like what you've mentioned previously, is about marking their own homework, these councils. Well, we had an issue in Bury in 2015, just prior to the previous the general election, and it came out after the election that the chief executive and the leader of the council had kept quiet about one of their own councillors, who had been was then being investigated for producing child pornography. And this council had actually previously worked for Oldham as well, coincidentally, where these issues.
A councillor or a council officer?
Councillor.
It
was a councillor.
So it was elected rather than employed. Yeah.
Yeah, he was elected. So if she's knocking it back to the councils to investigate, the example of Bury leading up to an election, which is a class as a marginal area for general elections, you would have had the chief executive and the leader of the council investigating themselves, and they're the ones who actually kept quiet about it in the lead up to an election.
Was this councillor convicted? I mean, because if they're convicted,
yes, he was convicted. Yes, he was convicted. The chief executive stood down just prior to disciplinary action, and the leader of the council stood down as leader and then stood down as a councillor. Although he did get a nice job with the council housing authority, which was 6-town housing afterwards. Oh. So yes, they all did actually. He did get convicted, and the chief executive went, and the leader of the council went. But under Yvette Cooper's procedures that she's looking at now, like you say, not only do they have no authority to compel people to come and give evidence or be witnesses, they would be investigating themselves. And if Berry was doing that, would they be covering it up?
Yes.
You know?
Well, I mean, there is. I think we have to assume and anticipate, Stephen, that that's exactly what's going to happen, because the problem is this has gone on for so long, and it's so serious and so deeply embedded in some communities, and certainly deeply embedded in many councils in terms of those desperate efforts to cover up, because that cover up probably affects multiple people within those organisations: councillors, council leaders, council officers, council chief executives, senior police officers. Once you start unpicking the thread, there are huge implications, in terms of who might actually be liable for prosecution for such, but also in terms of some of those people presumably still being in post. I mean, is it beyond the realms of possibility, Stephen, that some of those individuals that have covered these things up, maybe haven't orchestrated the crime itself of child rape, but I suspect some have, but the very problem, the issue, the culpability, the empowerment of covering this up, those people will still be in post, and therefore not only will lose their jobs, but if this is a predominantly Labour political thing, and it does, I'm afraid, seem to be so, in terms of the councils that are affected, that might just be a matter of geography, but that does seem to be the issue. I mean, this could blow up the Labour Party permanently, couldn't it?
It could, yeah, and I think you're right in saying that it goes a lot deeper than a lot of people are aware of, and I think the only see, I'm not a fan of Starmer anyway, but if he just said, look, yes, this may affect the Labour Party, however, it is that serious, I want to root it out and we will have an inquiry. I think more people would have thought better for him, regardless of all the other stuff that's going on.
Are you a Labour voter, Steve?
I'm not a Labour voter, no. I never have been. But I'm not a fan of Starmer, but my view of him would have been increased from what it is if he'd have said, look, it may affect Labour, but this is that serious, it needs dealing with, and I think people would have thought a lot more about him. But I think that the reason he's not is because of his previous CPS role.
Well, let's be clear, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Yeah,
he makes great stock of the fact that he brought many people to justice in 2012, but what he doesn't tell you is that he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, where some of these things would have come across his desk from 2008. So the way I add that up is that perhaps Keir Starmer is responsible for 4 years of apathy, 4 years of turning a blind eye. Stephen in Bury, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. We're going to take a break, back with Candice Holdsworth and some other stuff after this, including a guest, Viram Mir, who is the uncle of a released Gaza hostage, Almog Mir. Back after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk, and I'm sitting in for Alex Phillips till 1 o'clock, and delighted to be doing so. She's off in the United States, I think, Alex Phillips. I don't know what's going on there at the moment over the next 2 or 3 days.
Nothing big, no, you know.
I don't know why she'd be over there. Maybe she's on holiday, sunning herself in Miami or something, but I think she's slightly further north than that, as I understand it. But who knows what Alex is doing. She will be back, don't worry, she'll be back in the hot seat next Friday. Right, look, let's talk about Gaza and the ceasefire agreement. Latest, of course, a hostage deal has been reached, maybe not quite ratified yet by the Israeli Security Cabinet, who are due to meet today to sign this off. It's definitely a step forward. Lots of people taking the credit for it. Joe Biden, of course, Donald Trump already, even though he's not inaugurated until Monday. Not everybody is happy, but I guess, look, the thing that we should be the most focused on is the hostages, of which I understand, from what I've read, there are 68 hostages still in captivity, have been for over 450 days. Let us hope, with all fingers and toes crossed, that they are alive. Sadly, I suspect that not all 68 will be. But look, to talk about this is Aviram Mir, who is actually the uncle of a released hostage. Aviram, thank you very much indeed for joining me. And sorry, forgive me if I haven't pronounced your Christian name 100% correctly. Mine is easier to pronounce than yours, I suspect, when you're just a mere Essex boy like me. But so forgive me. But look, talk to us about your circumstances and your nephew first of all, please.
My nephew is okay. Is challenging with life. Is still far away from any routine or anything that will bring him back to normal life. But he's living his life, is okay, is concentrated, he can make decisions, he will be okay. In the future, he will be very okay.
So when was he released?
8th of June.
8th of June.
Last June.
And presumably he, as a consequence, is suffering still physically and mentally, unsurprisingly.
Physically, he's not suffering from anything today. Mentally, as I look at him and talk with him, I can't see anything different. But we don't know what will happen in the future.
I can't think. My mind won't stretch to a place where I can possibly imagine what he and the other hostages have gone through.
I can tell you that he tries to put it aside. He tries to live his life now as much as he can. He can't live a normal life because all the time he's tagged like a hostage, so he's invited to lots of events that connected to the hostages in Israel and abroad. And he can't live his life normally, but he's living a small, good life, daily life, let's say.
And that's good to hear, heartening to hear, notwithstanding what he must have gone through, as I say, as the others have done in terms of that captivity, that uncertainty, that frightening situation. Why was he released, do you know?
He's been released because there was, a military operation.
So he was freed by way of an assault as such, was he?
Yes, there was a military operation, which in this operation was released 4 hostages. And the commander of this operation have died in this operation.
What? Sorry, the assault team leader or the leader of the person that was holding him captive?
The assault team leader.
Wow. So he was killed in action?
He was killed in action, yes.
Wow.
While he was releasing my nephew and the other hostages.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't seen that reported, which it absolutely should have been. So that individual surely is being hailed a hero in Israel.
Yes. His name is Arnon Zmora, and is considered as a hero in Israel, yes.
Because he is?
He is, absolutely.
So can we talk about the circumstances over the last 24 hours? So there has been a hastily convened peace deal based on a ceasefire, which obviously has been 14 months in the coming. It looks as though that involves a two-stage process where 33 hostages will be released soon, followed by others, and then, regretfully, the bodies of hostages that have not survived the ordeal. But the other side of that agreement also is that Hamas terrorists will be released from Israeli prisons. What do you think about that?
We have to do this deal. We have to do it for ourselves.
Even though Hamas terrorists are going to be released onto
they
the
are
streets
not important for my point of view.
Okay.
They are really not important. They are terrorists will go back to their homes, or I don't know where they will be released. I really don't care about them. I care about the Israeli civilians who are in captivity for the last 400, almost 70 days, and they should come home.
So you think they should be?
It's an open wound in Israel. It's still bleeding. The wound is still bleeding. We have to close this wound, and afterwards, we will proceed to the next stage of dealing with all those terrorists and other organizations which fight us. But
do you
first
think
we have to close it?
And I understand that sentiment, that the hostages are the most important thing and that they should be released. I mean, what you're saying is under any circumstances, they should just come back and come home. I understand that. I guess the resistance from some in the Israeli parliament, even in the cabinet, is that it almost rewards Hamas for the genocide that they perpetrated. And if they go off, into the ether, so to speak, it's going to be harder to fulfill Benjamin Netanyahu's mission, which of course has been clearly set out as the eradication of Hamas. That takes a step back.
I'm not dealing with politics.
Fair enough.
Absolutely, there are implements of politics to all this process. What I want to talk about is the hostages and the families which are suffering, which are living in hell. I talked today with several families. There is a lot of pressure that the first stage will start, and anxiety from the second stage, which haven't been planned haven't been planned yet. So we concentrate in complementing the process that everybody will come back home live and dead. This is, for my point of view, the most important issue. If the government will survive it or not survive it, and of course there are lots of people who are against this deal, and I listen to them. I understand what they're afraid of. I think they're afraid is right, but it's more important to release the hostages now.
Yes, and to have them back, and then to reset and decide on the politics and the military aspect. Look, I think that's actually hard to disagree with, because we are talking about human lives in captivity, as we say, for nearly 470 days, the effect on them, the effect on families. And obviously, for every day that ticks on, it is less likely that more and more of them come back alive. Look, a very tough subject to talk about, but again, on this channel, we will talk about these tough subjects. Look, I hope, certainly on my behalf, that the hostages as a consequence of this deal are released very, very quickly, and that you at least get some satisfaction from that. Avira Meir, Thank you very much indeed. A tough conversation, I have to say. Talking of which, we're going to have one with Peter Bleksley in a minute, because he wants to talk about the drill rapper killer, this individual that was released from prison after 14 years, having killed Jimmy Mizzen, only just to stick his fingers up at his licence conditions. He has this morning, as we broke about an hour and a half ago, he has this morning been recalled to prison. So we'll see what Peter Bleksley thinks about that back after this.
Suspended Labour MP Mike Amesbury. He has appeared at Chester Magistrates Court and basically he has pleaded guilty to assault by beating after punching the man in the street. That means there will be a by-election in the Runcorn and Helsby constituency. Now, he has a majority of 14,700. Reform UK came second at the election with 7,600. We know that's one of their target seats, so it could be a very interesting first test of how well Reform really are doing if they could take that seat.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm here till 1 o'clock. Join me by all means, either with a text message to 87222, plus the word talk before you message. Lots and lots of people have done that. I will be reading some more out, certainly before the end of the show. And also lots of calls. Thank you. Lots of people calling 0344 499 1000 to talk about all sorts of stuff, whether it be Kemi Badenoch and whether she's right and appropriate to say what she says with regard to people that come here and don't want to embrace our culture, and whether it's the conversation I've just had, which I think was quite a poignant and a slightly emotional one, actually, with Avraham Meir, whose nephew was released in June as a Gaza hostage, and obviously that's against a backdrop of a deal that looks likely to be ratified today against some opposition. which will result in the remainder of the Israeli hostages being released, and indeed Hamas terrorist prisoners that are currently in prison in Israel. So let me know what you think about that. 0344 499 1000. But what I want to talk about again now, we have touched on this. Obviously, we brought you breaking news on this criminal, this Jake Fahri character who killed someone. He killed Jimmy Mizzen back in 2009 without putting too fine a point on it. Sorry if you're about to eat your lunch, but he effectively glassed him. He threw a ceramic plate at him, intending him to be caused injury when they were presumably working together or whatever reason in a bakery. He got 14 years for that. He served pretty much the minimum, despite the fact that he caused lots of trouble in prison in terms of fights and general bad behaviour. And the probationary service of Britain decided, despite his crime and despite his bad behaviour in prison, and all sorts of allegations actually about potentially committing sexual assault on a nurse. We had a guest that talked about that as an allegation earlier on. Despite that, the probationary service said, no, it's all fine, just release him. That happened. He was released, and in just over a year since his release, he's now been recalled to prison this morning because he's breached his licence conditions by travelling to a place that he was otherwise banned from as part of his licence conditions when he was released in 2023. Now, someone I think that might have a strong opinion on this is my friend Peter Blexley. Blexley, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
What do you think of this, mate?
There are failings here by three main functionaries of the establishment. Number one, the Parole Board. Yet again, the Parole Board believed lies that were sold to them by a prisoner in order that they could be released. It is absolutely appalling that this rampantly naive and frequent failing body granted this killer parole. He was clearly not rehabilitated. He hadn't left a life of violence behind him, and so that was a very, very foolish mistake. The second functionary of the establishment that I call into question is the probation service. Now, we all know how understaffed they are, how under pressure they are. However, it would appear that in this case, the Sun newspaper was better at monitoring an offender in the community than the probation service.
And better at detective work, seemingly.
Yes. How on earth can that be, that we have a national newspaper that supervises somebody in the community better than the probation service? A convicted killer, no less. All praise to the Sun newspaper, all shame to the probation service. And lastly, my third pillar that I have firmly in my sights today, the national broadcaster, the British Broadcasting Corporation, who, on their Radio 1 Extra station, saw it fit to play records made by this man. Drill, of course, drill rap, that which is so famous for creating violence amongst gangs, subsequent bloodshed and death. They decided to play his tracks. There you have it. There's the three, firmly in my sights. Shame on the lot of them.
But Pete, the trouble is, I mean, you've outlined very articulately there the failings in terms of why this individual was allowed out, and he's not the only criminal that has been allowed out of prison inappropriately. I mentioned earlier one of the most famous ones in recent months has been, of course, Gary Glitter, who was almost immediately recalled. We've had all sorts of killers and rapists that have sold their sob story, as you put it, and been allowed out, and it turns out that has been completely inappropriate, and they have simply offended or indeed breached their licence conditions again. So we, unfortunately, these days are not surprised by the inadequacy of the probation service. We're not surprised by the lack of judgment of the BBC, because, of course, there's no accountability there, frankly. But I guess the thing I really want to focus on, mate, is the Parole Board. I mean, who are these individuals that sit in judgment whereby the prisoner walks in, presumably with some kind of legal representation, I would imagine, and these woke yogurt knitting liberals are sold and accept and suck up the nonsense that comes out of the perpetrator, the criminal's mouth, and his lawyer, and 9 times out of 10 they don't give it any kind of critical thought whatsoever. They just agree and assume that what that individual's saying about them being reformed and wanting to do some charity work, and I'd like to go and, you know, stroke kittens for the rest of my life. Why is it that the parole board are so dysfunctional, so woke, so overtly liberal, that they are allowed to get away with releasing a procession of dangerous criminals onto our streets?
I would urge any viewer or listener who may be questioning what you and I are saying or shaking their heads in disbelief, I would urge them to go onto the internet and simply search the parole board. And when you go onto that website, you can see who these people are, their backgrounds.
And who are they? Are they professionals, or are they lay people like magistrates that are pulled in from, you know, the streets of Britain and kind of given a quick once-over vetting? I mean, maybe hoping that they are kind of, you know, cotton wool covered libertarians. I mean, where do these people come from? Who are they? Do you know what the profile of a parole board member is?
Yes, you can read their profiles, and there are members of the public, I say that in inverted commas, that serve almost as volunteers on this body. But overall, if I were to sum up each and almost every one of them that are on that parole board, they are, in my opinion, left-leaning, liberal, lentil-munching, Guardian reading people who are rampantly naive and have the wool pulled over their eyes on a regular basis.
But presumably recruited by equally yoghurt knitting individuals that are responsible for recruiting them.
Yes, they are essentially establishment kind of people.
The same people that have infiltrated the police, the civil service, our education system, and so on. Pete, just wait there one second. I know Candice, our good friend Candice Holdsworth, who obviously we frequent the likes of Plank of the Week with together, she wants to ask a question or make a point, I think.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you know, just on this parole board, you know, sometimes when people talk about its failings, they speak specifically in terms of resources. You know, they're under strain, they need more money. But do you think it's actually more of a cultural problem based on what you were saying? You know, the failure to set a very strict, you know, more traditional culture?
If the parole board had a few more hard-nosed, seasoned, well-weathered detectives sitting on it, perhaps not so many people would be successful in their applications for parole.
So, Pete, how do you, me and Candice get on the parole board?
Yes, well, I think there is a process through which you can apply, but I'm sure they'd get about as far as the L in Blexley before shredding my application. I think, you know, I welcome anybody to, as I say, search them up on the internet, go and have a look, see if you can apply. But they are essentially establishment figures. And of course, as such, with the sirs and the people with their awards and other titles that toe the line because they are every inch a part of the establishment, when perhaps directives are handed down saying we've got a prison crisis, overcrowding, no spaces, feel free to let any of them go, I wonder if that pressure is brought to bear, and I wonder if it has any influence over their decision making. Yeah. It shouldn't do, because the parole board is there to protect the public.
Yeah.
But I'll throw another sadly infamous name into the mix, Colin Pitchfork. Of late, we know time and time again they simply get it wrong.
And how much of this do you think is pressure because of the lack of prison places?
I'd like to think it didn't feature at all.
It shouldn't figure.
But of course, I'm not that daft. I'm sure it is. I'm sure the memos have been handed down, just like they've been handed down to the judges and the magistrates. These directives saying, find any other sanction rather than sending people to prison, which is what is happening these days.
Yeah, and but Pete, you also... You mentioned your 3 pillars of shame. I think there's a 4th one, and that is why this individual, Jake Fahri, only got 14 years for murder in the first place.
Well, once again, that's you need to direct your disappointment, I'm being polite, towards the Sentencing Council, yet another pillar of the establishment, who hands down the guidelines to judges through which they must abide, because if they impose too stern a sentence, and the hard done by criminal appeals as a successful appeal, then that of course is a black mark against the judge for handing down a stiffer sentence than they should have done.
So you don't think this is overtly liberal judges, which of course are normally in our crosshairs here? You think it's a question of sentencing guidelines, which of course are set out by the Sentencing Council. Now, let me think who was on the Sentencing Council for a number of years. Oh yes, Keir Starmer, the chap that now happens to be our Prime Minister, shock horror.
These are establishment bodies. This speaks so much about the rot at the very centre of our great nation. Let's take our politicians, for example, that live in Westminster, an absolute echo chamber where their little spads, their special advisors and their minions who run around them slavishly doing what they're told, actually tell politicians what they want to hear and not what they need to hear. Go to the police service of Great Britain, the police services, length and breadth of the country. Once again, those corridors of power are echo chambers.
Yeah, but you and I, Candice, most of the people listening to this are very angry about this because it's a repetitive thing. Look, Peter Blexley, thanks as ever for joining us. I'll be back after this with Brendan Shelton, Labour councillor.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone midday. Good afternoon. I'm Russell Quirk. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your participation, particularly those that are texting and on Twitter, X, whatever it's called this week, and indeed those that are calling on 0344 499 1000 to opinionate and to vent your spleens. Thank you very much indeed. We'll get to some more calls later. Still got Candice Holdsworth here, who's ably supporting me, Candice, aren't you? Because
yes.
I need that help and support.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm very anxious, you see, very depressed. And otherwise I'd have to have a third of my week off. We're going to come back to that later on. That won't be me, by the way, but that is under 25s, snowflakes. But before we get to that, let us talk some more politics and particularly about migrants and Suella Braverman and Elon Musk, actually, with Brendan Chilton, who is a Labour councillor. And interestingly, this might be an oxymoron, actually, CEO of the Independent Business Network. Wow, Labour and business. Brendan, what's going on there?
Well, the Independent Business Network is an organisation campaigning for a competitive tax environment and competitive business policies in the UK.
That is an oxymoron then against what Rachel Reeves has just done to businesses.
Well, I think when Rachel Reeves came into office, she did commit that she would not raise income tax, VAT and all the rest of it, which left her with only one other tax that could possibly be raised, which was employers' national insurance contributions.
Well, apart from inheritance tax, which she did as well, and stamp duty, which she also did.
And while the national insurance contributions were not preferable, she did say that this was a one-time budget and that we would not be seeing that again. Of course, we've got to wait and see what happens in future budgets. But of course,
I think she pledged, didn't she, that she wouldn't increase taxes further. But then, she didn't tell us most of the stuff that she was going to do before the election anyway. The point about national insurance, though, Brendan, surely is that even though that is an employer levy, so employers now paying another £20 billion across Britain because of that rise in national insurance contribution by 1.2%. We all know, come on, let's be honest with ourselves, Brendan, that absolutely affects people, because it will mean that businesses can't afford to employ as many people, so they'll lay people off, like BP have just done, 8,000 people, and that it will have an effect in terms of pay awards, pay rises and so on in the future. So that levy, that increase in tax on businesses, does affect ordinary working people, doesn't it?
An increase in any form of taxation does affect working people.
So Rachel Reeves lied?
No, she didn't lie. I think there were other...
You just admitted, you've just
If you let me answer the question, I think what I was just about to say was there are many other reasons why other companies like BP have laid off workers. Now, returning to your particular point on national insurance contributions, that wasn't ruled out in the Labour manifesto. Did I want Labour to increase national insurance contributions? No, I didn't. But she has said that's a one-off budget, so she didn't lie. And she will say in the future budget, we will not expect to see those further increases in taxation.
So do you agree with the tax increases despite being the CEO of the Independent Business Network?
Oh, no, I've just said to you very clearly, none of us wanted to see those tax increases, but they have come through.
But do you agree with her?
No, I don't know how more clear I can make it. No,
you said no one wants to see them, but that's not saying that you disagree with the Chancellor in your own party.
I don't think I'd say them if I wanted to see. I don't think I would say that if I'd wanted to see it, would I? I think anyone can interpret that and understand my position. But I think what we're saying now is she has said that's a one-off budget, and in future budgets, she has said we will not be seeing further increases in taxation. Of course, we've got to wait and see what she does in future budgets, but we can only go by what she has said.
I can't wait. I'm bubbling with enthusiasm. Let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, who in the last 24 hours has said, and I'm sure you've seen this story, Brendan, that if you will not embrace British culture, then basically you shouldn't be here. You should go back to where you came from, is effectively what she's saying. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the Labour Party entirely agrees, which is why it's deported 16,400 people since it's been in power. But the question we've got for Kemi Badenoch is, she was in government for 14 years. Why did she do nothing about it, and did migration reach record heights? It's all very well spouting off in opposition, but we can judge her by what she's done, which is nothing.
Yeah, but what about what Labour are not now doing about particularly illegal immigrants coming into the country? 16,000 deportations, that's about 5 months' worth of illegal small boats.
Well, I think it's the highest number of deportations since 2018. Labour have also, they've been in 6 months. You've got to employ and train the new Border Security Command. Discussions are taking place at the moment on a new treaty with Germany, which we expect to be signed in the summer to deal with the migration problem. The government, of course, have scrapped the Rwanda scheme, which deported none. It was a load of bloody nonsense.
Because it didn't start, though. And actually, many European countries now, ironically, are looking at exactly the same scheme. And I suspect the Labour government in the next few weeks and months are going to have to resort to a very similar scheme because the Labour government in 6 months have done precisely, as you well know, nothing about the problem of illegal immigration. But I want to go back to the question about Kemi Badenoch's. I want to go back to the question about Kemi Badenoch's words.
You've just made a false statement. They have done stuff about illegal immigration. I've just listed what the Labour government
they haven't stopped the flow of illegal immigrants in small boats into this country. They are at a record high. So 25% more small boat immigrants into this country last year, 6 months of which was under Labour governance. The amount of small boat illegal immigrants is increasing, not decreasing.
And I've just told you exactly what they're doing. The Labour government came in July.
But the numbers aren't going down, Brendan.
If you let me just finish my sentence. The Labour government came in July. You are not going to reverse 14 years of failure on migration in 6 months.
But Keir Starmer said he was going to smash the gangs. He hasn't smashed anything. apart from his own credibility.
If you allow me to finish my sentence for just one moment, the Labour government have been in for 6 months. They have put in place in those 6 months measures that will see the numbers fall this year. So I've just said the training and employing of the new Border Security Command, the treaty with Germany to ensure that the migration crisis is dealt with further down the line, increased number in deportations. We are deporting record numbers since 2018. So stuff is being done to tackle the border.
So you think in 6 months' time, if we diarise that you come back on this show and talk to me in 6 months' time, that the number of small boat illegal migrants into this country would have reduced? Can we put a pin in that and agree that we will put a calendar note in, and I'll bet you £100 it hasn't happened?
I'll bet you 100 it has.
OK, done, OK. Noted. Noted. But let's go back to the Kemi Badenoch choice of language. That's what I really want to get to. You and I, unfortunately, Brendan, much as I'd like us to, are not going to solve the problem of migration ourselves. But the language chosen by Kemi Badenoch, do you think it was appropriate to say that if you won't embrace British culture, you should... She said you should not be here, but I think what we read into that, of course, is that effectively what she's saying is the old trope, which is go back to where you came from.
Well, what does she mean by that? I mean, are we going to have culture detectors? I mean, what does embracing British culture mean? Does it mean we all have to watch EastEnders on a Thursday night
and eat fish and chips?
What does it mean exactly? It's such a vague, ridiculous statement.
No, but is it? No, but it's a question of integration and accepting our rules, our cultures, our customs, and not trying to change it.
That's a different statement. That's saying will you obey the law? And yes, everyone should obey the law. But the idea that we're going to have culture police going around, I mean, for example, I would say curry is just as much part now. British. Curry. Have I got to eat a curry?
This is a bit of mission creep happening here, I think, Brendan. No one is saying, Kemi Badenoch is not saying that this will be policed. What she is saying to those that seek to come here, that you should come here expecting it to be British and Britain by way of culture and rules, regulations, laws and customs. She's not saying it will be policed, but I can't see how she's wrong. I mean, I would not expect her go and live in Dubai, where I'm off to tonight, by the way, actually, and I will test this out. I might get to the airport and insist that the regulators, the police, the courts and the customs there adapt to my every whim. How do you think I would get on?
Well, I don't think you would, but I think by and large, most people that come to this country do obey our laws, do get on with our way of life, and have integrated wonderfully. You've got, obviously, in every society, a handful that don't. Just as when British people go and live in Spain and still drink Tetley's tea and order marmalade and have egg and bacon for breakfast, just as British people live in
I think it's a bit more serious than that in terms of what many would say is the failure of multiculturalism. So just wait there, Brendan, but Candice wants to snap at you, I think.
I don't want to snap at you. I guess I want to come at this a little bit from a women's rights perspective, because I think, one of the things that one of the big failures of cultural integration in terms of the grooming gangs issue is that the attitude a lot of these men had to women and girls and how they should be treated. And I think that, that's not necessarily a law that you can obey. It's not like fish and chips. I mean, that's a very serious fundamental issue, and it has such ramifications for women in this country and young girls as well. So, I mean, how do we address that issue?
I entirely agree with you. There are particular issues with cultures where they do not have the same rights as women. Those cultures do not respect the same rights for women as we do here in Britain and other parts of the world, and that must be addressed. The way I think we address that is through ensuring that the legislation that we have in this country is enforced. Now, I think the Home Secretary yesterday did announce there would be local gangs. I personally think we should have had that announcement earlier.
Well, local investigations, you mean?
Yeah. Someone that's worked in sort of inquiries, not in criminal affairs, but in other ones, if you organise a huge national inquiry, we will not get results or recommendations for it for another 6 to 7 years. Now, I think most of those victims want justice now. I think there were recommendations from the J Review that have not been implemented. They should be done. In terms of the education aspect, one thing we do need to make clear to people is if you do come to this country, women and men have equal rights, equal access to services and equal access before the law. And if you don't like that, this is not a country you should come to. And I think everyone, whether you're Labour, Conservative, whatever, agrees with that.
Well, it sounds like you agree with Kemi Badenoch.
Well, I think I agree with most decent people in this country that women are equal to men and have been under British law since the 60s and 70s with things such as equal...
Do you agree with Yvette Cooper and her U-turn?
I don't think she has had a U-turn. She's announced...
It's a quarter turn.
Well, what would you say was the U-turn?
Well, the U-turn is Labour for 3 weeks saying we don't want a national inquiry, presumably because they're worried about what it would uncover. And then in the House of Commons yesterday, Yvette Cooper saying, well, OK, go on then. You can have 5 probes at local level, but only undertaken by councils that would then mark their own homework. So it's a partial U-turn, isn't it?
Well, there's no national inquiry, and I think all along the government has said...
Do you think there should be, Brendan?
I've just said to you, I don't think there should be a national inquiry. Because
is child rape not important enough?
That's such an absurd statement to make. Of course it is.
Why is it? Why is it absurd to say that child rape is not as important as politics?
A national inquiry will not deliver results for another 7 years.
It doesn't matter. It will probe deeper than a local inquiry, because local inquiries, as we heard from a lawyer earlier on today, will not have the ability to requisition evidence or to ask people to speak under oath. It will have no teeth, no depth. I would rather have an outcome in 5 years' time than a bit of window dressing that will serve no purpose whatsoever in the short term.
So the position you're advocating then is that these people that have suffered sexual abuse should have no answers for 7 years.
No, I'm advocating that there should be a deep national inquiry, and I don't agree that it would take... No, they're your words, that it would take 6 or 7 years. Perhaps under previous administrations, perhaps these things have taken 5 or 6 years, but actually done properly by proper people outside the civil service, frankly, these inquiries can be much, much quicker and should be. So, of course, I'm not advocating it should take 6 or 7 years. You're putting silly words in my mouth, Brendan. I haven't said that. What you're saying is that there should not be a national probe into a largely Labour problem of covering up child rape. That's what you're saying.
I'm afraid you're now sinking into the absurd. There is not a Labour...
What you said. It is a Labour problem.
No, it's not a Labour problem.
How is it not a Labour problem? It has manifested itself across Labour areas and Labour councils almost entirely and uniquely.
The Labour Party came into government in July last year. The grooming gangs issue has been going on for well over a decade. It is a disgusting crime.
And it's largely a Pakistani Muslim perpetrator.
And those
in
people
Labour areas.
And those people that are found guilty of it need to feel the full weight of the law.
Well, they won't if there's not a proper probe, Brendan, will they?
What the government have said is that it would be a delay of justice to have a national inquiry. Now, if you launch a national inquiry, the average national inquiry in this country that's ever taken place has taken at least 5 years. I think it is far sensible to implement the findings of existing inquiries, which the previous government did not do. And I think what would be a sensible thing to do would be to get those done. Now, we can have inquiries, you can appoint judges, you can appoint external people and all the rest of it. I can almost tell you now what the findings are going to be. The fact that the people didn't whistleblow, local authorities failed.
We need to find the people, Brendan, the people that cover
I don't disagree.
Brendan, I'm sorry, we've got to move on. I'd love to debate this all day with you. And look, thank you, because you do put an articulate argument, I have to say. So I appreciate you coming on. Until next time, going to take a break. Back after the break with Dame Andrea Jenkins, who's going to be talking about her mother and her mother being told what she can and can't say on social media by the Conservative Party, believe it or not.
The government collects so much money from us on roads, for example. You know, the road tax keeps going up. You know, electric car drivers are now going to be paying road tax as well. I mean, 40 billion, I think, was the last estimate I was told, that is collected every single year. We've got places like Transport for London in London, where they collect hundreds of millions of pounds every year in ULEZ fines, in parking fines. You know, every single council in Britain is absolutely lording it up with millions and millions of pounds. And yet the roads get worse. Why don't they spend some of that money on the bleeding roads?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 12:19. I'm going to go straight to Dame Andrea Jenkins now. If I'm allowed to call her Andrea Jenkins from a conversation I had with her a couple of weeks back. Andrea, thank you very much indeed for joining me on Talk.
I'm not driving.
Are you stationary?
I'm in Boston. Yes.
Good, I can see you in the car.
I don't want a flood of people saying I'm driving.
No, I know you're stationary.
Yeah.
And I know you're having a very, very busy day because of this, well, not just because of this, but contributed by this story about your mother. Would you like to explain this nonsense?
Yeah. Well, it's my late mum. She died in 2022, very sadly.
Sorry.
So what happened... when she was a Conservative Party member, obviously her daughter was the MP at the time, she received an email, Russell, from Conservative HQ saying that there's been complaints about you and the posts that you're liking on social media. Now, I remember her showing me the email at the time and they attached the screenshots. And, you know, I remember it vividly. We're talking about something about grooming gangs, something about this Syrian refugee family where they're complaining about living in Britain, it's not to their standards, and the comment which Mum had liked was, well, don't come here, then go back to your country if it's costing taxpayers money.
A bit like Kenny Badenoch said just yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
Ironically.
Well, as we've all been saying for years, let's face it. And also there was another one about illegal migration, and looking at it, it's stuff that we have all been saying for years. And what happened, the process then, they suspended my dear mum, who was in a very late 70s, and then investigated it, and then the only way she could get, and this went on for about 18 months, the only way she could get her party membership back, I mean, initially she said,
so they suspended her, Andrew. They suspended her for liking some tweets about migration.
Yeah, well, it's Facebook posts, yes. And at the time, she said, "Don't bother, Andrea." She said, "I said no, it's the principle of it. You know, your daughter's an MP. You know, you won't even be able to vote to reselect me as a candidate to stand in the next general election. You've pounded in the streets like every other activist. You know, this is about freedom of speech." And so I fought within the party hierarchy. It went to two party chairmen at the time, and I couldn't get it overturned. The third party chairman come along. I kept pushing at like his office, and finally we got an email then which said about the seriousness of this, and we'll allow you to come back to the party, have your membership back, providing you do this equality and diversity course. Now, Mum said, "No, I'm not doing that." I said, "No, I'll do it for you because I want to see what is in these modules."
This is astonishing stuff, Andrew. I mean, sorry, your mother's in her 70s. She innocently likes a Facebook post or two that reflect the majority mood of the nation, and certainly what should be reflected by the Conservative Party, what actually has been reflected by the leader of the Conservative Party just yesterday, and she gets suspended. You have to fight to get some kind of a reprieve, and she's then made to do a diversity training course.
And honestly, this course, it took about 3 hours to complete. It was ridiculous. And it's what is a pansexual, all the different sexualities.
Sorry, that was one of the questions.
It's like something from the BBC. It's like
one of the questions was, what is a pansexual?
Yes, exactly. And so some of the stuff would make you blush, to be honest. I'm glad I was doing it instead of mum. But do you know what is even more concerning? My friend Claire Bullivant, she runs the Conservative Post online newspaper blog. I don't know if you saw yesterday, but she put a tweet out. She's a good mate of mine, and she was really shocked with what's gone on and said, look, is this still happening? Please contact me. And I was speaking to her earlier, and she's told me of a case where there was a woman in her 80s who had dementia and got asked to do the same thing. And so it seems like this is a common problem in the Conservative Party. I mean, I haven't got the details of when this happened or whether it still goes on, but Russell, this is ridiculous.
But this is the sort of thing that you expect in an overtly left-leaning, woke Labour Party. Now, can I just, not the Conservative Party, and this is only going back, a couple of years or so, isn't it? So this would have been under the leadership, although I'm not suggesting he was involved directly, of Rishi Sunak, presumably?
No, because the thing is, they've obviously been looking into it for a while, because the post was from 2016.
But why are they targeting your late mother? Do you think this has got anything to do with you? Were you causing a bit of trouble and they thought that they'd use your mother to unsettle you? I mean, do you think there was another agenda here?
No, I mean, the original email said that they had complaints. Now, I don't know where these complaints. I mean, if it had been during the Brexit years, I was a pain in the bottom, wasn't I, for the party?
Good.
So who knows? But the fact is, it shouldn't be happening. And where's freedom of speech? But also, I mean, my poor mum. Like I said in the Telegraph yesterday when I spoke to them about it. My mum had really bad eyesight. Social media was a lifeline, which it is for a lot of older people who's stuck at home, and so she'd be scrolling through stuff, and quite often she wouldn't even know she was liking it with fat fingers.
But you and I, Andrea,
it's the freedom of speech.
You and I, Andrea, we could have the debate about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the fact that shouldn't bar you at all from any membership of anywhere, but at least not the Conservative Party. No wonder you left, frankly. Look, Andrea, thank you very much indeed for your another regular contributor to Talk. Good luck with your campaign, by the way, to be Mayor of Lincolnshire. So Andrea, of course, is standing as the Reform candidate in that race. Let's go to a caller, though, before we go to break. Anne in Sussex. Anne, welcome to Talk, and thanks for calling.
Oh, hello, Russell. Thank you for allowing me to speak. The reason I rang is because for many, many years, what I've seen happen is when we're looking at diversity, and I was a bit put off by the gentleman who was speaking earlier, every time you try to say about the British way of life, is that...
He was taking the mickey out of us, that he said it's all marmalade and fish and chips, pretty much, didn't he?
Oh, how lovely for him. But he doesn't... ordinary folk, they know differently and they question. And I think when we've seen the streets of our main cities with people coming out waving flags, fighting against what is the British way of life, that we
You mean Palestinian protesters on the streets of Britain?
Yeah. And we have people who are frightened to be in their own towns and cities, people frightened to speak. And what I saw happen over many years is that the imams who are brought over, for many of the Muslims, are often very primitive, backward people. And they've come to the UK to lead the men and women here. And
but hang on, so let me just qualify. We're not saying that Muslims are all backward people, Anne, are we?
No, I didn't say that. I said some of the imams, not the Muslim people. Goodness, I helped our people to get their mosque, and I work with them, and I like them very, very much, and I'm not being, patronising. Yeah. What I've seen is they are controlled by, and that's what religion does.
Well, because they're so deeply religious, you're saying that because they're so deeply religious, that the imams are controlling their thoughts and behaviour almost.
I'm afraid they are, and it does mean that families here always have to send a large percentage of their income back to those countries. That is why. Now, I can understand that. We would want to look after our people if we were in different countries. But what I think I object to, and talking to younger people, is that why in this country do certain people have rights and protection, but say our Jewish communities don't?
Well, a two-tier approach to policing and justice, which of course we talked about on this channel, well, certainly since the summer, since Keir Starmer was elected, because we do, I'm afraid, whether it's culturally or from a judicial perspective or a police perspective, we do live in a two-tier society. You know, and the grooming gang subject that we've talked about so much over the last few days not only highlights that, but it's been admitted by senior police officers and police forces that the grooming gang problem across the nation was covered up because of fears of racial incitement and disturbing certain sectors of the community. That is in itself a confirmation, proof of a two-tier approach, isn't it?
Yeah, Russell, can I say what worries me, and it has for many years, is that what we have is a society run by people who've all been to university, and I went to university for a while, and I was surprised at the very strong left-wing bias, and I was a Lib Dem back then.
Oh, really? You were the one?
But what worries me is that they've been educated into a frame of mind, and they're running local government, police, health.
Well, they are. No, I've got to go to a break now, Anne, but I really appreciate your call. You sound like a Radio 4 newsreader, by the way. I love your voice. You sound fantastic. Yes, it's what Donald Trump, who will be president, 47th president of the United States on Monday at 12:minutes, it's what he calls the woke mind virus, and believe me, it has infiltrated Britain, whether it be the civil service, the NHS, our education system, our police. It has infiltrated, and we must stand up and stop it. I'll be back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. It has just gone 12:30. I'm here just for another half an hour. Still with Candice Holdsworth. Thanks for your patience on the last item. I wanted to come to you, but I know that Dame Andrea didn't have loads and loads of time. But I'm sure you want to dig into this next segment, though, this next subject. We're going to skip over the Atlantic to Washington, D.C. We're going to talk to Matthew Bryser, who's a former White House official and an absolute friend of this show and this station. Matthew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Russell, for those kind words.
No, my pleasure. Good to see you. Good to speak to you. And there's something going on over there on Monday, apparently.
I hear some kind of parade and
a party or something. I mean, what is it? Talk us through it.
Yeah, people standing on the steps of the Capitol. Yeah, a huge day. I mean, it's the inauguration of President Trump as now the 47th U.S. president, after also being the 45th one. This is the moment of the actual transfer of power. And it's the last moments then of Joe Biden. And when I've been in inaugurations, it's kind of emotional because the previous president walks away, gets on a helicopter, and flies into destiny.
Wow, or somewhere. He won't really know where he's going. I don't suppose with Joe Biden. You could take him anywhere and just tell him it's somewhere, and he probably wouldn't realise. And is the transition of power, and obviously, look, we've seen all the confirmation hearings in Congress over the last few days, which have been fascinating, actually. And I've got to say, Trump's picks, I think, have done an absolutely fabulous job of really kind of destroying questioning, kind of problematic questioning, attempts at kind of skewering them. They've done a fantastic job of being robust against that, all of them actually. Particularly, is it the Attorney General, Pam Bondi? I think she was absolutely brilliant in her articulation of her point under fire, so to speak. And also the incoming Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who's of course an ex-Fox News anchor. He made a really good account of himself. So all of these people now in place, is it the case that literally at a minute past midday on Monday, Trump's the president, Joe Biden's not anymore?
That's how it works. And by the way, on Pam Bondi, full disclosure, she and I have worked together at a Washington lobbying firm, including on a couple projects together. And she was amazing in that she was being, trying to put her on the defensive and say, isn't the justice system at risk of being weaponized against Donald Trump? And she said, wait a second.
That's already happened against Trump.
It already happened. Yeah, she was fantastic. So in any case, yeah, that's it. I mean, officially under the U.S. Constitution, that's it. Everything changes. And, people who were political appointees in the Biden administration who haven't had their jobs renewed have to leave. They have no access anymore to any of the official facilities.
And does that apply to the civil servants and such? Because in the UK, of course, the civil servants stay in place. We have what are called permanent secretaries that stay at the Treasury or the Department of Education, Department of Defence. Does everybody leave the White House?
No, some may stay for a little while. In my experience, I spent 4 years in George W. Bush's White House, and for about 6 months or so, we had a few people that were still from the Clinton administration. But Donald Trump is doing something different. And to answer your question, we don't have permanent secretaries, but we have career bureaucrats. I was a career diplomat, and so we stay always throughout, and we would get like the top 2 layers or so of the bureaucracy then would be political appointees. But Trump's doing something different at the State Department, at least. He has asked for the resignations of 3 people, relatively senior officials who are really kind of in the nuts and bolts of the bureaucratic operations, because he's going to put his own politically loyal people in those jobs. And these jobs control personnel, overall management, and the flow of information. I've never seen that before.
Wow. And are you going to the inauguration on Monday?
I'm not going to go. I will be, full disclosure, on a family ski trip.
Okay.
But I have been to plenty.
But you'll be applauding from Aspen.
I will be. I will be heartily. Yes.
And what do you, and I know Candice wants to ask you something, but I just want to ask you a question first. What do you think the first things that Donald Trump is going to do? I mean, literally, Monday obviously is a day of some celebration. I suspect some champagne might be drunk throughout the day and the evening on Monday by Trump, his team, and their supporters. What are the first things that he's going to sign in terms of course, executive orders that either unwind things that Joe Biden has done or indeed enact new directives? Can you give us any clue as to the top 2 or 3 things that you think he's going to attend to first?
Sure. And by the way, Trump won't drink any champagne because he doesn't drink any alcohol, but I'm sure his teams will. And there'll be balls all throughout the evening. I think right away he's going to make moves on deportation of illegal immigrants. I don't know what the text will look like, but he will, I'm sure, empower law enforcement agencies and perhaps the U.S. National Guards in various states to pursue illegal immigrants. I think he'll and deport them. He will also, I think, on day one, sign a rescinding of the asylum policies of the Biden administration that allowed migrants into the United States to claim asylum once they reach U.S. territory. Once they get asylum, it takes them a while to get a hearing to figure out whether or not they really do face a fear of persecution or physical harm if they return to their countries of origin, and then they're released into the U.S. pending a hearing that could take place years later. I think Trump will end that right away. Yeah. He soon probably will again, I think, pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which Biden on day one brought the U.S. back into after Trump had pulled the U.S. out.
So kind of ripping up the whole net zero approach for the United States, which means that we shouldn't pursue it here in the UK, because if the United States, given that they are responsible for about 25% of the planet's emissions, what is, I mean, it's a sidebar here, Matthew, but what's the point in us worrying about our 1% if Donald Trump, understandably, and I think he's right, I agree with him, is going to rip up anything that ties him to a net zero target?
That's a compelling argument, and there are economists out there who make exactly that point, that countries, well, like the EU, I mean, like the UK, sorry, who contribute so little to global emissions, but are so technically capable and wealthy, ought to be developing the technologies and then investing money or providing financial aid to less well-off countries that don't have the technologies to do the energy transition.
The other thing he seems intent on is cancelling wokeism. How's that going to work?
Yeah, well, he's kind of already done it. I mean, it's unbelievable just since the election how many U.S. Financial institutions, banks and investment funds have already said, we're quitting all the DEI, ESG, woke stuff. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to make money for them.
So this is the likes of Morgan Stanley, Matthew, who have said, look, we're not going to pursue DEI and net zero policies anymore. Of course, he's got Mark Zuckerberg on side, who was quite the antagonist, I think, as a kind of pseudo-Democrat supporter. I don't know if he ever came out publicly and said he was, but he was pretty much a Democrat supporter previously, but now he's sucking up to Trump. That's all very interesting. Let me just ask Candice, because I think, again, Candice has got her hand up at the back of the class here, Matthew, so she wants to say something. Candice.
Do you know, just on that point that you were talking about, the way things are shifting, I think political journalists now, we talk a lot about moods and vibes, and so I'm interested to know, what is the mood of the country like now with the outgoing president and the incoming one? Is there a big shift in mood? Are people sort of happy to see Trump come in? Are they sorry to see Joe Biden go? Are things just dividing along the usual partisan lines? Is there something different going on?
Yeah, it's a great and thoughtful question. So, my hardcore Democratic friends are horrified and, jokes about making sure their passports are valid so they can move to Canada. But that's a very small minority of people. Biden's approval rating is down to 33%, something like that. So the lowest it's been in his administration. So that means most Americans, whether they're Democrat or Republican, are happy to see him go. And if you think back to last midsummer, it was only, I think it was like 27% of Americans believe that he had the cognitive capacity to run for president and then do the job. So I think in general, people are relieved to see him go. There's trepidation about Trump, of course, because he's such a disruptor. But having said that, I think more Americans than expected are not just resigned to Trump taking over. They're relieved, I think, that we're not going to have a repeat of the election results being called into question as they were, 4 years ago on January 6th. But also, I think there's way more people than expected who kind of are welcoming the disruptive, okay, maybe in some ways nihilistic approach of Trump, but his disruptive way of saying, I'm not going to be bound by the political correctness or by ideological structures. I want to do what makes the most sense from a business person's perspective on a transactional basis. And I think a lot of Americans are finding that refreshing.
Do you think Trump will be more grown up? I think, he showed a lot of immaturity, I think, in his first term and in the campaign for that first term. Do you think he's learnt from that? Do you think, particularly with the people he's got around him, the people that we referenced earlier on, like Pam Bondi and so on, and of course Elon Musk and others, do you think he'll be more grown up and more credible in his second term?
Yes and no. So in terms of the campaign, much more grown up. I mean, you'll recall during the previous campaign, he made fun of handicapped people and he called Mexicans rapists. That wasn't really present in this campaign. And I think his survival of that first assassination attempt really shook him and actually made him grateful to be alive to a certain extent. And
it gave him a boost, Matthew, let's be honest.
Oh, hugely. I mean, it made him look strong. And even my friends who really despise him had to say, wow. That was pretty impressive, and he's saying fight. But then in terms of the nominees, some of them will be more grown up, like Secretary of State nominee Senator Marco Rubio, but some not. I mean, I think the nominee for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth.
You mean Hegseth?
Yeah, I do mean Hegseth, yeah.
The guy that's been accused of kind of being drunk at work and all sorts, but he's kind of shrugged that off. I thought that his confirmation hearing, I thought he was very impressive at the beginning of this week, actually. Very articulate, very prepared, and actually very down-to-earth and grounded as a veteran of the United States military. I thought he dispensed with questioning from the Democrats superbly. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate into a successful tenure, I'll grant you, but I think he's had a good start, don't you?
Yeah, well, I thought that he was masterful and annoying as heck, if you're the questioner, in the way he didn't answer those questions. There was Senator Tom Kaine from Virginia was really trying to pin on him some marital infidelities, one of which he had admitted. But Hesketh kept on flipping the question, saying, well, those baseless allegations about a sexual assault case were never proven. But Kaine wasn't asking him about the assault case. Yeah. He was asking him about what Hegseth had already agreed to in terms of marital infidelity.
Yeah, but Matthew, one question he was asked very directly, which he answered very directly, was about his tattoo. Now, I don't know if you saw this. So he has a cross of Jerusalem on his chest, and a Democrat representative asked him a question about it, and I think slightly tongue-in-cheek said, how do you explain the extremism, the racism almost, of that tattoo that you have on your chest? And Hegseth answered by way of saying, well, it's interesting, I was just in I think he was in a cathedral in Washington, and he said, I looked down, and in that cathedral in our state capital, our national capital, was exactly the same cross on the floor of the cathedral. And that rather, again, shut up and dispensed the questioner, didn't it?
It sure did. It shut it right down, yes. And so he was masterful, because he's a great commentator on Fox News, masterful at that moment. The big challenge is, can he manage, the biggest organization in the world? I mean, 3 million employees with such an enormous budget. But that's, the bottom line is, I think the Senate, especially the Republicans, of course, will defer to President Trump as having a right, like any president, to choose who they want to staff him, unless there's some egregious legal problem or flaw of character.
Yeah, well, let's see. Economically, I think that many would agree that Trump's second term as 47th president could be as successful as Ronald Reagan's. That's a statement. Let's see. Matthew, as ever, thank you. We'll have to leave it there. Going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking about, this is unbelievable, Gen Z, so 25-year-olds pretty much. 1 in 3 of them have called in sick over stress recently. What a bunch of snowflakes. I'm Russell Quirk, not a snowflake. Back after this.
The government collects so much money from us on roads, for example. The road tax keeps going up. You know, electric car drivers are now going to be paying road tax as well. I mean, 40 billion, I think, was the last estimate I was told, that is collected every single year. We've got places like Transport for London in London, where they collect hundreds of millions of pounds every year in ULEZ fines, in parking fines. You know, every single council in Britain is absolutely lording it up with millions and millions of pounds, and yet the roads get worse. Why don't they spend some of that money on the bleeding roads?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, and thanks for your company over the last nearly 3 hours. I'm off at 1 o'clock, handing over to Ian Collins. But before I go, probably the most irritating story of the morning, this. And it's got some competition, let's be honest, particularly when it comes to people that only do 14 years for murder, get let out, stick their fingers up at the probation service and get recalled to prison, presumably just to get let out again in a year's time. But anyway, yes, that is not just irritating, that is sinister and concerning. But slightly tongue-in-cheek, I say this. This is a story in the Daily Mail today, and I've got a brilliant guest to talk about this. This is unbelievable. So a third of Gen Z workers, so those around the age of 25, took time off due to stress last year. Now, I ask you, what have 25-year-olds got to be stressed about? They live at home. They've probably got a car on a lease that mummy and daddy pay for. The bank and mum and dad funding their potential house purchase. Eating avocado sandwiches for lunch and the like. Netflix subscriptions galore. How on earth can a 25-year-old be stressed? And assuming they're working, I mean, what are they stressed about? The person they're sitting next to, or the fact that their boss has actually asked them to do some work? This is absolutely outrageous. And of course, this is increasing all the time. Let me just read this before we go to Maxwell Marlowe. Workers aged between 25 and 34, 29% took time off due to burnout, really, and that's up 23% in a year. I would suggest, actually, and I'll get Candace's view on this in a few minutes, I would suggest that this is because the spectre of COVID and lockdowns and working from home and so on is dissipating. Some of these people now got to go into the office and they're stressed about it and they don't know what to do about it. This is absolutely ridiculous. Let's talk to Maxwell Marlowe, who's the Director of Research at the Adam Smith Institute. Why are under 25s, indeed under 34-year-olds, really, Maxwell, such snowflakes, so woke?
Well, hi, Russell. So this is from YouGov, a poll commissioned by Mental Health UK. They asked 2,300 people across their poll survey to answer some questions about their working status. So, as you said, we've got about a third signing off due to burnout. We've also got 56% saying they're overworked. 45% worried about redundancy, mainly due to AI and the forthcoming sort of generation of AI products, which could see their work undone. And then we're seeing 48% working unpaid overtime in their work. So it's a bit more of a round story, to be honest. I can take some sympathy with them. I'm 25. I'm Gen Z. I didn't take any time off last year.
Well, because thank goodness you're here. You could have bailed out Maxwell just now and said, like, I'm a bit too anxious to come on and talk on Talk.
I could have said that, but I'm never going to do that, Russell. So, look, let's look at what's happening here, right? So we do have the COVID problem, which is that, for people of my generation, we were locked in our university accommodation, not allowed to talk to anyone, not allowed to socialise, having Zoom university. That negatively affected our social lives and our character development. Let's not forget that. We could see that as well with young people who have come through the school system and also affected by COVID. That's an international problem. But we can also see this now actually through their aspirations and with what they want to get through with work. You mentioned Bank of Mum and Dad, paying for a lot of this stuff. Well, the reason for that is because actually, if you go from 2008 to today, real wages for young people have only increased by 8%. whereas the cost of rent has increased by 67%. So we're looking at ginormous disparities between generations here, and that's contributing quite a lot to the stress. And to be honest, young people are feeling hopeless about the future of Britain and the future of work. So I think we should be more constructive in how we're addressing this problem. And to be honest, Russell, not calling them snowflakes.
Well, so what we're saying is that this is clinical, and this is because they are hard done by. But young people are better off now than they ever have been. I mean, in terms of their demographic, their wealth as individuals, and yes, I completely accept that, you know, many of them haven't bought a home, and the average age of a first-time buyer is 34 years old. You know, frankly, and I say this with no disrespect, Maxwell, being an apologist for them on the basis that this is COVID clinically induced doesn't help them pull themselves up by their bootstraps, get on their bikes, do better, and kind of fend for themselves, does it? How do we solve the problem of this snowflakeness infection? And I will keep saying it because they are. You and I can disagree about that if you like, but how do we solve the problem, seriously? So you've outlined the reasons. What do we do about it? Because otherwise, in the future, roll forward 20 years, we've got a lot of 45-year-olds that don't want to work. How does that pay into the tax system and into my pension?
Well, I don't think it's to do with them not wanting to work. We can see actually employment rates are quite high amongst young people, and they're quite eager to get out to work, but they want to get a job which pays well, and that's really hard. So a lot of that's actually to do with the planning system and the way we build things in this country. Let's look at America. The average American is 40% better off than the average Brit is, and that's because they aren't worried about, you know, upsetting NIMBYs and wanting to build roads and reservoirs and power stations, increasing their productivity. What we see with the British economy at the moment, very low productivity. People are working actually very hard for quite little output relatively. So how do you fix that? It's planning, it's investment into workers and making sure the government isn't there to tax businesses like we're seeing at the moment, taking away that investment, but also making sure that the tax system is actually working for, you know, workers and people. Because at the moment, we're seeing mass amounts of money siloed off. That's loads of people working day in, day out, working hard, seeing that money disappear into the black hole of government waste. And it's just having a really bad effect on people's character and also on their prospects and outlook. So
lower taxation and a free market approach, like, I'm not going to disagree with that. But also surely the other problem that we haven't highlighted, that you haven't mentioned, is this problem of social media, where those under a certain age seem to think that because they are following goodness knows who on TikTok and Instagram that appears to have the perfect life. You know, they're off on holiday and they're in the best restaurants and they're driving lovely cars and so on. There's this kind of false aspiration, I think, that is bestowed upon the younger generations, where therefore, if they don't then themselves end up with a new BMW 2 Series or their own apartment in Canary Wharf, that they somehow do feel depressed and anxious. I mean, so the fakery, the kind of false premise of social media surely has something to do with this, doesn't it?
Well, you can definitely draw on examples like that. Look, I don't have TikTok or Instagram. I just use Twitter.
But you're not anxious. That's why you're here
I'm not
on
anxious,
the programme.
No. Well, here's the thing. So there's a really great American psychologist called Jonathan Haidt who's released a really great book called The Anxious Generation, which looks at Gen Z and onwards. And he does point to social media and the addictiveness of social media, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, etc., having really negative effects on young people. And I think there needs to be a much better conversation with young people about how they use social media. I don't think it's the role of the government, not at all. I think it's the work of...
and I'm sure that given that you're a free market advocate, you wouldn't be talking about censorship or banning social media in order to solve that problem.
Definitely not. No, I think it's down to individual responsibility. I think it's down to parents as well. I think a healthy parental network and teaching kids not to sit on their phones, you know, eating together at the dinner table, not having your phone at the dinner table, really, really important, stuff like that.
So parenting, but hasn't the Labour state taken over our parenting?
It certainly has.
Brushing their teeth, brushing their kids' teeth for them, and feeding them breakfast
as well.
and lunch. Yeah. Well, maybe with the Tories that aren't really Tories. Yeah, I guess so.
Exactly.
Look, Maxwell, thank you very much indeed. Great insight. Just very quickly, Candice, what do you make of that? Because you work hard. You're here. You haven't phoned in with anxiety or stress.
No.
And you've got 3 kids at home.
Yeah, I was going to say, just wait till you have kids and you have a baby squalling all night, 10 times a night, and you've got to get up at 5, 6 in the morning and perform. Yeah. And no one's going to make excuses for you.
And someone that I've never, ever known to have a day off sick, although he does go to, I don't know, far-flung places across the world, the Bahamas, Barbados and so on, Thailand, I'm sure. So he often has a holiday, but is Ian Collins.
Yeah, absolutely.
When's the last time you had a week off for anxiety, mate?
A week off for anxiety. Isn't that funny? You know, it's such a strange question.
Isn't it funny how your response, your reaction is, what are you talking about?
Idea of going, you know, and like we're all parents here as well, and so we get it. We've all been through that stage of the sleepless nights, and then of course the problems with kids just change as they get older. Different kinds of problems. You worry about the school, etc. You've got to pay your tax bill because it's that time of year, which is never all sorts. It would never occur to me that I would have a day off work because there's a bit of jip going on in my head.
You were no doubt preparing out there, but this is news that a third of workers, so not just people unemployed, workers under 25 have had time off very, very recently because of anxiety,
should
stress,
all be
and
in
depression.
jail.
Well, I question what on earth they could possibly be stressed about at 25 years old. When I was 25, I think I was stressed about whether the pubs were open, but not anything else. At 25, I mean, no, what is there genuinely to be concerned, depressed?
I was stressed as to whether Amanda Burzio fancied me, and that was a big one.
Did you ever find out?
Never did find out, no. I think she crossed to the other side, as it turned out. So
wow, okay, that's not a good validation for you.
No, not really.
So, talking of finding out, should we find out what you're going to be talking about for the next 3 hours?
I'll tell you what we're going to talk about. Kemi Badenoch talked about this. It was